The presidential limousine that the Secret Service calls the Beast is being brought around for the new president. The car is essentially an Abrams tank in Cadillac clothing. It's really not any car that General Motors builds. It's not a modification of an existing vehicle. It is designed from the ground up to be the limousine of the President of the United States. Mr. Trump was riding around in it earlier today without the seal of the President on the door, but of course, since noon today, the seal has been placed on the car for him. Norah O'Donnell is on the National Mall where all of this has been unfolding. Norah?
We just saw what I think is one of the most beautiful parts of the inaugural parade, and that, of course, is the pass and review, watching the finest and bravest in our country pass by and salute their commander-in-chief. And as you noted, Scott, now he gets into this incredible limousine that is known as the Beast, where I'm told that the president can't even open it from the inside because the doors are so heavy. But this will begin the inaugural parade, and according to President Trump's advisors, this is going to be one of a shorter parade, only 90 minutes, in part because they say they want this to be a workmanlike inauguration, that he wants to get started and get to the White House. But the pomp and ceremony that goes on with this inauguration is just about to get underway, as there are some, I think, 8,000 participants that have come from all across this country to participate in this parade.
Norah O'Donnell of CBS This Morning. Norah, thank you very much. We were concerned that there was going to be rain all day in Washington today, and it really hasn't come down much. There's just a sprinkling of rain, not enough to spoil this parade. It's not going to rain on the parade, so to speak, the best we can tell at this point, which may mean that the new president and the First Lady will walk part of the way. It's 47 degrees in Washington right now. Pretty nice day for January the 20th. I'm reminded that Ronald Reagan had both the warmest and coldest inaugurations in history, 55 degrees and 7 degrees in his second inaugural. When it was 7 degrees and the wind was blowing, they decided to move everything inside, and he was sworn in the rotunda of the Capitol and not outside.
You know, Scott, your description of that being basically a tank in disguise is exactly right. It reminded me of something I hadn't thought of in years. When President Ford was president, he was up campaigning in Connecticut, and some kids were coming home from a movie or something and hit the presidential limo broadside, and the car just bounced off. Nobody was hurt, thankfully.
The president's limousine surrounded by and driven by what the Secret Service calls the PPD, the Presidential Protection Detail. They're going to make their way off the Capitol grounds, come on to Pennsylvania Avenue, then it's a couple miles drive down Pennsylvania Avenue, and then a little bit of a dogleg to get back onto Pennsylvania Avenue right in front of the White House. You know, I'm reminded that Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House used to be a thoroughfare that people drove through, and then after the bombing of the building in Oklahoma City, the federal government realized that the White House could be damaged by a truck bomb in that same location, so they cut it off and made it a pedestrian mall. Fran Townsend, tell us a little bit about the security precautions for the parade on this rather short trip to the White House.
You know, Scott, one of the wonderful things about it is, regardless of who the new president is, this has been practiced and practiced and practiced. So this is a national security special event. That means that for example, the temporary flight restriction that is always over the Capitol and the White House is expanded to give the Air Force more time to respond if there was an errant plane. the military district of Washington works very closely with the Secret Service to make sure that they're fully integrated, along with the Washington Metropolitan Police Department, who, as you saw in earlier images, is covering the protests that are on the outskirts. There are perimeters of security that start quite far out. We know it in the media. Just getting to the National Mall this morning before dawn took a long time. The inspections were quite intrusive, and actually, I thought unprecedented this year. So umbrellas, if they weren't collapsible, were taken away and confiscated. Aerosol sprays were not permitted. Small bottles of water, the bottles had to be small. And I think that was an anticipation of not only terrorist threats, but the domestic sort of protests that we saw this afternoon during the lunch.
And as you could see in that picture, not even the most powerful man in the world can avoid the DMV. The automobile has Washington, D.C. license plates, and his license plate is number 1.
So right now they're assembling the security forces to prepare for because it changes, the posture changes when the president is actually making that trip from the Capitol to the White House, and they're making sure they've paused for a moment to make sure everything's in place. We hear helicopters here overhead. They will remain overhead. There'll be civilian air patrols in the air by the local National Guard unit, and all of that is an umbrella of security that covers the National Capital Region while the president is in motion down Pennsylvania Avenue.
And the 2 men in the front seat of the car are both Secret Service agents who've been specifically and rigorously trained in the systems that the car has in terms of defense, and trained in driving in any kind of situation.
It's completely sealed off, Scott,
From the outside air.
That's
Yes.
exactly right.
in case someone should try a gas attack.
And of course, all of those men and women standing around who are in the Secret Service would give it all to save the president.
I mean, they have trained for every contingency. So in the event of an attack on the parade on Pennsylvania Avenue, exactly how and where the air assets would come in to evacuate him is practiced. They've timed it. They know exactly how to do it and where they would take him.
There is the parade route. That's Pennsylvania Avenue there, and there's going to be a little dog leg down here. He's going to drive by his new hotel, and then a dog leg on 15th Street, back onto Pennsylvania Avenue, and right in front of his new residence, moving into federal public housing. And a large review stand has been built there. The president, the first lady, the vice president, and his wife will be sitting in the review stand with other dignitaries, and then they will watch the entire parade go by. There's the review stand already filling up. Looks like a bunch of blankets being brought down there. But again, it's 47 degrees, which is a pretty nice day in Washington. There's Pennsylvania Avenue. Large crowds on both sides of the street, but maybe even more security people on both sides of the street. You can see the no man's land between the security people and the large crowds of people who are there to watch the president go by. And among the people standing by, waiting for the president to come down the parade route, is our very own Jan Crawford. Jan?
Well, Scott, we're here right by the Russell Senate office building across the street from the Capitol. The presidential escort, which you just saw the President Trump reviewing those troops, has started making the march down the street. And then we will be just in front of the president as he starts this parade route. There's going to be about 8,000 people following President Trump and the First Lady. And, of course, we're going to be expecting him at some point. The rain is holding off for now to get out like presidents typically have done in years past. The parade's going to be about 1.5 miles long. It shouldn't take more than 30 to 45 minutes, depending on whether or not he decides to get out and take a little stroll down Pennsylvania Avenue. But so far, the weather is holding off, and the people are lining up to march.
Hats off to Jan Crawford. Thank you very much, Jan. Appreciate that
Hats
very
on.
much. Hats on for Jan Crawford. It's a beautiful hat. And it looks like we've lost the feed there just for a moment. That'll happen from time to time. You see the white van there. That's a camera crew, and they'll have a electronic link that links the video back to the broadcast facilities. And every once in a while we lose the signal, but not all that often these days.
And he will be going past Trump Hotel.
He will be going
Which is
past
on
his hotel,
Pennsylvania Avenue.
which just opened recently. It is the historic old post office building, a 19th century building, one of the tallest buildings in Washington. And he has turned that into a luxury hotel, and it's just steps away from the White House. Fran, as we are watching this, security-wise, what do we not see?
Oh, so behind this, there is an incredible information and operations center that is sort of controlling all of the many moving pieces. I talked about air assets. There are ground assets. I talked about there's the Secret Service, the military, the local police. There's we have intelligence assets feeding into this in case there are any threats. And so NSA and FBI, all those command centers are up and running, and they're all feeding into the event command center so that everyone has a real-time and fully integrated picture of the threat, and they have the situational awareness about where the president is and any threats that he may have to confront.
And we can presume that there's air cover
Yes.
overhead.
Civilian air patrols are in place. We can hear the helicopters overhead right now. Absolutely. And they will remain, the air assets will remain up there and in place until he is safely at the White House.
Now, there have been protests since the inauguration. There's been a little bit of violence. About 95 people, at least at this point, have been arrested by the Metropolitan Police. Some windows have been broken. Pepper spray has been used. This is distant from where the parade is proceeding down the street. But our Anna Werner is down there on the parade route, and she's telling us that she can actually hear those protests around the corner. Anna?
Scott, that's right. I'm in front of the Trump Hotel. That's what you see across the street, with many of President Trump's fans and supporters waiting for his motorcade to come down through the parade. But where you can't see, off to my left, just a little ways down there, we've been able to hear for several hours today, they've been there all day, a very vocal group of protesters. So if President Trump decides to stop here to say hello to staff members of the hotel who are actually out there on the steps, who've been holding banners up today saying, "Thank you, Mr. Trump," if he chooses to stop and get out, roll down the window, in all likelihood, he is going to hear those protesters saying things like, "Not my president," like they've been chanting all day, Scott.
Anna Werner, thank you very much. Now, Andy Card, as we have watched all of this over the last several hours, the Oval Office has been redecorated. It has been repainted and redecorated
done all over
in just a few hours.
President Obama probably had his last visit to the Oval Office a little bit before President-elect Trump came over for tea and crumpets. And then a team from the General Services Administration, the janitors of the government, came in and painted the walls, changed the rugs maybe, took the pictures down, set up the Oval Office the way the new president would want it to be, put his family pictures on the tables behind the desk. I'm assuming they're going to use the Resolute desk, and although I don't know that. But it will all be done over to look spectacular. I'll never forget the first time I walked into the Oval Office before President George W. Bush entered it the first time as being president, and it was breathtaking to see the transformation in that sanctuary of democracy that it's called the Oval Office.
The Resolute desk is called the Resolute desk because it was a gift from Queen Victoria to the President of the United States, and it was built from the timbers of the HMS Resolute, a British vessel.
That was rescued by Americans, refitted, and presented back to the British.
It had been stuck in the Arctic, if I remember correctly, and rescued, as you said, by American vessels. President Bush used the Resolute desk. FDR used the Resolute desk. President Kennedy used the Resolute desk. And there may be many others as well.
There are. And the
Andy,
most
it's-
famous picture in the Oval Office was actually of John Kennedy peering out of the door in the front of that desk.
It seems to me they're kind of slow getting going here. Do you suppose something is not going according to plan?
The pace is very slow.
The pace is slow, but I will admit, usually they don't like to stop the motorcade. Once it starts, it doesn't stop. But they were stopped for quite a while, so there must have been some communication back and forth. And it may have had to do with the parade, not with security.
Right. No, it could easily have had to do with having the parade, right, get them all lined up and ready to go. Although that's typically, you've got hours to do that while he's at lunch. And the pace is a little off. I don't know.
You know, we were talking about the Resolute desk. Somebody stopped me, but the seal of the president is on the front of the desk, and FDR had that placed there in what would be the knee hole of the desk, so that people could not see that he was wearing braces for his polio.
That's right.
And it's been there ever since, and many presidents have used the Resolute desk. You know, there was a picture earlier today that I'd like to try to recall. President Obama was caught, if you will, by a camera that was in the Rose Garden as he was making one of his last trips to the Oval Office. And he was taking a letter that he had written for the incoming president and putting it on the Resolute desk so that when the incoming president, Mr. Trump, walked into the Oval Office, the first thing that he would see on the top of the desk would be a letter from President Obama, probably a letter of welcome and a letter of advice. It's a tradition that has been going on many years.
It's a wonderful tradition, and reading those letters demonstrates the empathy that an outgoing president has for the incoming president,
Here's the
and
picture.
the commitment of support.
Here's the picture now. There's the president walking into the Oval Office and leaving the letter on the desk.
I actually think they put it in the drawer.
In the
After
drawer.
After they sign they'll actually also
They
sign
actually
the
sign the drawer
Right.
and put the letter in there.
But he
Sign
put it
the
in.
drawer itself.
Correct.
Sign the drawer itself.
Correct.
What-
As does the vice president at his desk sign the drawer, and so you can look at it.
And you'll notice that the ladder is already in there. They're getting work done in there.
They're tearing the place down while the
Right.
president's still in there. And imagine what the inside of that drawer must look like with the signatures of the president there. And we don't know what is in the letter that President Obama left for Donald Trump. Perhaps President Trump will share that with us at a certain point. Now they're making their way down the parade route where Jan Crawford is. Jan?
Well, Scott, it may seem like we're going at a leisurely pace, but that's because the troops that we saw President Trump reviewing are actually marching in front of this parade as the presidential escort. It's members of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department and all of the branches of the armed forces are right there marching in front of us. And then, of course, you can see the motorcade right behind us here with President Trump and the First Lady coming down the street. We will hit right up here, begin to turn on Pennsylvania Avenue and then make that drive to the White House. But there are crowds of people lined up here in support of President Trump. We've, of course, heard about the protests, but we have not heard them here. We see people cheering. There's a child waving an American flag on her father's shoulders. Everyone videoing with their cell phones, of course. So now we have some people chanting Trump, holding signs, all greeting. I mean, this is really kind of the first big crowds of people that President Trump will see. I mean, this is almost since he's taken the oath of office and met there with members of Congress and leaders. Now he is seeing the people, and these are supporters who put him into the White House. Scott?
Speaking of hats, most presidents for many years wore top hats to their inauguration, but it was President Eisenhower who decided to wear a fedora, which apparently really got under the skin of President Truman. He did not want to wear a fedora, but he finally gave in at the last minute and wore the common man's hat because that is what Dwight Eisenhower wanted to do during his inauguration.
And you know, it was the Kennedy brothers who killed the hat business in America for men, because you know, we were getting to the stage where men started blow drying their hair and getting these expensive haircuts, and you put on a hat and it kind of messed it up and so forth. And Kennedy didn't like to wear any hat. And after that was about it for hats.
Now we're hearing the cheer of the crowds as the presidential limousine proceeds. We would expect, if tradition is any guide, the limousine to stop at a certain point and the new president and first lady get out and walk part of the way. President Obama very much enjoyed that during his inauguration.
Scott, the Secret Service would have given the new president advice about the place along the parade route best suited from a security perspective for him to do that. And I would guess, assuming that the Trump Hotel is in that zone, somewhere near the middle is the easiest from a security perspective, that's where I would look for him to get out.
That's my guess.
Yeah.
And that's generally where presidents have gotten out, somewhere along there.
And it's from a security perspective the easiest for them to protect. It's the most inside the multiple perimeters.
Now, you talked about the Resolute desk. President George H.W. Bush did not use the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. He did use it in the office upstairs in the residence.
The president's private office.
The private office.
Most people don't realize that the Oval Office is preferred by some presidents, but other presidents like to use a private office in the White House and just use the Oval for ceremonial events. You know, Jan Crawford, as you're rolling along with the motorcade there, give me a sense of the sight and the sounds. Tell me about the people that you're seeing.
Well, Scott, the crowds are actually getting larger as we progress toward Pennsylvania Avenue, and all that we've seen so far are Trump supporters waving small American flags, waving red Make America Great Again hats, taking them off their head and waving them around. But, you know, I'm also struck by the high level of security that we see here. The crowds are quite a significant distance back off the road behind two metal barricades, police officers facing the crowds, and then we are being escorted on foot by Secret Service. So there is a high security presence here. But these crowds that are greeting President Trump are very enthusiastic. These are supporters. These are the people that sent him to Washington to change things, to shake things up. That's who's here right now to greet him as he makes his way to the White House. These are his supporters. These are the people who sent him there. And this is really the first time that he is seeing the public as president of the United States.
Does everyone have their cell phone up and videoing
well, we
this
see
moment?
Quite a few. We definitely see a lot of people trying to kind of get a video of this moment. Now they're anxiously awaiting President Trump, who is probably right now about I'm terrible at estimating. I'd say half a football field. How about that, Scott? Or maybe about a third of a football field behind us right now. So they're anxiously awaiting him, you know, as he rolls by. So they've got their cell phones ready, kind of peering down to see where he is and where he's going to be coming. But, you know, we just see a lot of signs, children, people of all ages, people holding their Trump signs. But, yes, a lot of cell phones to get a shot of this moment as President Trump gets onto Pennsylvania Avenue, which is right now we are turning onto Pennsylvania Avenue, the Capitol, of course, in the background, and the motorcade here getting ready to turn onto Pennsylvania Avenue with the other end, the White House.
Can we switch back to the Jan Mobile? I want everyone to see. There it is. That's the Jan Mobile. That's our version of the presidential limousine. That's Jan on the back of the truck with the TV lights
yeah,
there.
We like this.
She's rolling right along with the rest of the motorcade.
Oh, wait, where
there.
are you? Oh, back here. I see you guys.
Say, Jan,
Yeah.
what we
So I
hear.
see. Nice. I can hear you, but I can't see you. I know where you are, though.
We can hear all the crowd noise behind you. What are some of the things that people are shouting?
Right now, they're saying Trump, 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 Trump. I mean, it is a unison, kind of an eruption of joy. They know that the president is about to pass them, so there's a lot of anticipation at this moment. A lot of happy faces and just it's a lot of excitement, because this is when they're going to be seeing the candidate, the man that won the presidency. This will be their first look, at least in the car, at the president now, the new president of the United States.
Fran Townsend, how is this crowd vetted from a security standpoint? Are these people who were handpicked, or is just taking all comers?
Scott, this is America's parade. This is the country's parade. And so, no, the people that you see lining the Pennsylvania Avenue are not vetted per se, but what they are is they've gone through at least 2 and some 3 checkpoints, and at different points in their journey during the day. And so all of them have been searched, magnetometers, all of it.
You're watching live CBS News coverage of the inauguration of the 45th president. Welcome back to CBS News coverage of the 45th President of the United States in that limousine right there with the First Lady as they proceed down Pennsylvania Avenue toward the White House. We are expecting to see Donald Trump and his wife step out of the limousine at a certain point and walk part of the parade route. The President was administered the oath of office by the Chief Justice of the United States at noon today.
The President of the United States, and the First Lady, Melania Trump.
You know, Andy Card, Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, it seems to me that presidents always come to Washington to change history, and history always changes them.
I think it is both. They do. Every president leaves a stamp on history. They do change, but I do think presidents have changed much more than they thought they would be by serving as president. And a lot has to do because of the sacrifices people make around them. They are very moved by the American people, and especially those that step up and say, "I will serve." So the call to noble service is an important call for the president to acknowledge, recognize, and reward.
That was never taken for granted by George W. Bush.
Never. He greatly appreciated anyone who served, whether it was as a staffer at the White House or on the front lines of a military battle in Iraq or Afghanistan. He was completely grateful for the service that people gave to this country.
And you know, I have heard him say at times when, you know, he was being heavily criticized, and he would say, "Look, nobody made me do this." He recognized that was part of the job, and it was very, very tough.
Well, he had phenomenal parents who inculcated him with the call to noble service for our country, and he certainly has lived it.
And the parade is passing, as you can see there, the Canadian Embassy, which is right there along Pennsylvania Avenue. Anna Werner is also down with the crowd as the parade approaches her location. Anna?
You can see Trump supporters who are pressed up against these barricades here, and they are very excited. You can feel that excitement, but I gotta tell you, you can also hear what a moment ago was an undercurrent of boos coming from the protesters, and I can still hear them chanting a little bit even as the band over here starts marching by and playing, Scott. So the question is President Trump going to get out in front of the hotel, and what are we going to hear out of these crowds? Will the supporters drown out the protesters?
It's sort of nice to see a little kid.
It is.
You know what I mean? And he's acting like a little kid in the car. He's
Yeah, we just moved in.
watching the parade move along on Pennsylvania Avenue. And we're reminded that also in the car with the president is his young son, Barron. So you have the president, the first lady, and Barron in the presidential limousine. It has been a very long time since we had a young son in the White House. Not since John Kennedy have we had a young man in the White House. You see the U.S. Capitol there in the background and the big crowds lining both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue. Joining us just now is Bob Woodward of the Washington Post, legendary reporter of the Washington Post. Bob, I'm interested in your impression of the president's inaugural speech today.
Yeah, it was a surprise, and as Bob Schieffer was saying, he took the hide off everyone, and what it is, it's a speech for the people who elected him. It was a campaign speech, not an inaugural speech. But you've got to remember that where Trump comes from, he's a deal guy. He spent his life making deals, and in this case, what's happened, this is his opening bid. I'm going to stick with the people who voted for me, and then they will negotiate. I think the other side of this is where he comes from, a culture, a business culture of exaggeration, where it's acceptable to exaggerate. And he is known to call producers or reporters who've done a story, say, on job creation, and that he's saying provably that the numbers don't hold up, and he calls and he said, no, wait a minute, come on, I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to get jobs. Don't get hung up on the specifics. So But this speech was a jolt, and I think to lots of people, even his own supporters, there was a sense of where's the outreach. Then in the luncheon, he said nice things about Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. That might have gone in the inaugural address.
The presidential limousine just passed the museum right there. You see it on the left of the screen. In monumental letters on the side of the museum is inscribed the First Amendment to the Constitution, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, my favorite part, the freedom of the press, all carved in stone. That tower that you see there on the right, that's Donald Trump's new hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue. That is the old U.S. Post Office building, a 19th century building. There had been plans at various times to demolish it, but they have refurbished it now into the new Trump Hotel, and he's terribly proud of that, and he'll be driving by there shortly. And Bob Schieffer has money that is where Donald Trump will get out of the car and walk part of the way.
That's generally where presidents, when they decide to get out of the limo, they generally are in that vicinity. And I think, Fran, you pointed out it's one of the safest places you can kind of protect better there because it's the way it's surrounded by buildings.
That's right, Bob. And I will tell you, while it always seems sort of a sudden, spur-of-the-moment decision where the president gets out, it's not at all. He's discussed this with the Secret Service, and they have snipers in place. There's a whole panoply of security measures in that area, and they kind of agree, if you're going to get out, this is the stretch where you'll get out, and then they pre-deploy assets there. And so it's actually quite scripted. He can, of course, decide not to get out if there's inclement weather or it's cold, but it's pretty scripted where his zone is if he wants to get out and walk.
47 degrees for our Jan Crawford is right now in the parade. Jan?
Well, we are seeing a lot of protesters. We are approaching it right in front of the National Archives. This is a major protest to greet President Trump. We saw a few signs earlier in this parade route, but now these crowds here are all protesting the new president. Everyone carrying signs, my president, impeach Comrade Trump, impeach Trump, shouting.
Ladies and
we
gentlemen,
heard some boos earlier.
President of the
but
United
nothing like
States,
this. This is an
Michael
organized
R.
crowd.
Pence.
And you can hear the boos now, see the signs. No Trump. Everyone really is carrying a sign. I see very few Trump supporters here. We are, of course, across the street from the National Archives and just approaching the FBI and the Justice Department in this stretch of Pennsylvania Avenue.
Jan, how long does that stretch of protesters go? Are you still seeing it unfold?
It's about half a block. It's about half a block, I would say, on both sides of the street, but mainly concentrated on the north side across from the National Archives, Scott. And it is a loud group, as I'm sure you could see. Many people holding signs, and now a heavy security presence with police officers and various law enforcement personnel. So the enthusiastic Trump supporters starting the beginning of the parade, I would say kind of wedged in the middle there, were a significant group of anti-Trump protesters. And now
today,
you hear boos. I can know if you can hear the boos. These are people who are booing us as members of the news media. And they're shouting USA and Trump. So some of the boos, don't assume they're all for President Trump. A lot of the boos that we're hearing are as the news crews roll by to report on this parade.
well, I hope they'll
these
enjoy
are
our
all,
coverage if they see
Trump.
it later.
Nothing new here,
Sorry.
Bob Woodward.
That is true.
Earlier today, we were seeing some violent protests distant from the parade route. A few blocks away, there were windows that were smashed by protesters who had come looking for trouble. They were armed with hammers to smash windows with, and the Metropolitan Police went after them with pepper spray and flashbang concussion grenades to disperse those crowds. We're told that there have been at least 95 arrests. But again, that was a few blocks away from the scene that you see here.
Yeah,
so no violence of any kind along this parade route. But certainly getting into the thick of the protesters who have come to make their voices heard along Pennsylvania Avenue. Bob Woodward, a polarizing speech at the inauguration, a polarizing candidate and president for this country.
Yes, and of course all of us in the media kind of thought, oh, Trump can never get the nomination, Trump can never win, and he did. So there's some strategy behind this that we probably are not aware of. What interests me in watching this is the parade and the pomp of the presidency, and there's been some criticism that Trump and his team are not doing enough to find out what really the presidency is about, not reading memos, not having contact. I've had the time to do a little reporting, and there's much more strategy. They are worrying about not the above the line, but below the line. And big issue is Putin and Russia. What's the relationship that Trump has, and what are his goals with Putin and Russia? And there's this outreach which has been criticized so much, and if you dig into this a little bit, you find that Trump and his team have a two-track strategy. They are going to reach out, try to work with Putin, but they also... There he goes.
And we see the Secret Service agents getting out, which we suspect means that the next person we see is going to be the President, the First Lady, and their young son.
And Bob Schieffer was absolutely right. This is now between the Justice Department and the FBI is on your left, the Justice Department's on your right, and it's just before the next big building you're going to see on your right-hand side is Trump Tower. So I hope you didn't bet, Scott, because Bob Schieffer won that.
Let's watch and listen for just a moment.
Trump may set the record here for the tallest shoes by a First Lady walking in the inaugural parade here.
And she looks fabulous.
Oh, she looks gorgeous.
She is stunning, and the young son, I'll bet that never happened to you, Bob Schieffer, when you were a teenager.
No, it never did. And I was just watching Jan Crawford. You know, this is my 14th inaugural, and I never got to do what Jan did and is doing, is ride in the parade. I always thought that would be a great assignment.
Well, let's go down to Jan, who is right there among it all.
And Bob, I was thinking, I hope that I get this assignment in 4 years. You can see the crowds cheering. I mean, there are no protesters around this vantage point where the President and the First Lady have decided to take a stroll down Pennsylvania Avenue. As Nora said, they got out right across the street from the Justice Department. And now we are approaching the Trump Hotel. And again, all we see right now are supporters. I know Anna had said she could hear some protesters from in the distance, but the crowds now appear to be drowning out those protesters as President Trump and the First Lady make their way down Pennsylvania Avenue, approaching the Trump Hotel. Scott.
Let's switch over to Anna Warner now, Jan. Anna, what are you seeing from your vantage point?
Well, we can see the President Trump and his family watching here, and this crowd is going crazy. They're really excited. However, just now, I'm hearing the chants, one chant on my right, USA, USA, boos, and some Not My President chants on the left. These groups have been trying to drown each other out all day long, and here comes President Trump in front of the Trump International Hotel. He's approaching toward the crowd with Melania and his family, waving at the crowd now. Everybody here has a smartphone. They're all taking video and pictures. He's waving at people at the hotel, and now it looks like he's getting back in the car. So a lot of people here got to see exactly what they wanted to see, Scott, which was a glimpse of President Donald Trump right here in front of them on the street.
Well, a glimpse is about all we got. It's a very short walk for President Trump.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter walked the entire way to the White House from the Capitol. No other president has done that since then, but usually the walks are a good deal longer than that. That tower that you see there is the Trump International Hotel, and Jan Crawford is right there in front of it. Jan?
Well, Scott, remember, we are just in front of the president, and it may be well timed that he decided to get back into that car because there is a large group of protesters just across the street from the Trump Hotel. He will not be walking. He's back in the car. He will not be walking past these protesters. There are a few Trump supporters mixed in, unlike the last group of people that we saw, but a lot of signs, very anti-Trump, some of them quite crude, and you can see and hear these crowds now. So President Trump and the First Lady took a short stroll, but did get back in that car just in time, I would think, from their perspective, before these next group of protesters that will greet them. Scott?
Bob Woodward.
Real quickly, if you saw the Secret Service man tap President Trump and we're getting back in the car now. Knowing Trump a little, I am sure his impulse would be to go to the hotel and hand out fruit plates as guests registered to make some sort of commercial contact. And the Secret Service said, back in the car, and he did, and I'm sure he didn't like that.
Well, as you know, they say in PR, they got the money shot. They got the picture of him in front of the Trump Hotel. That's what the photographers would say. But I think the Secret Service was probably wise in saying maybe it's time to get back in where it's warm and dry.
They're getting quite close to the White House now. They're going to make a right turn on 15th Street and then connect back up with Pennsylvania Avenue as it crosses in front of the White House, and they're just a few blocks away at this point. The sights and sounds of Inauguration Day.
And if I could say, right when this idea of the two-track approach to Russia and Putin. I think this is really important. This is on the agenda, and as he said in his inaugural address, he's going to build up the military, and so he's going to do things that Putin hates. So he's going to be giving him a left jab and then reaching out with the hand, okay, let's work together, let's do things. And this is grand strategy stuff. Whether it works, we will see. But there's more to it than a kind of naive, we're going to join Putin on everything.
Bob, what do you think his strategy toward the press will be? All this talk about moving the briefing room to someplace else. I mean, other presidents have held briefings in the old executive office building. Nothing new about that.
Trump has a love-hate relationship with the press, as you know, and he condemns us, and then if you want to talk to him about something, he very often will do it. Now, whether that's the case as president, we are going to see, and this clearly marks a demarcation line here, because now it's not just words. He's going to have to make decisions and do things, and that is going to define him and his presidency, not everything that went before, including that inaugural address.
As the new president begins to approach the White House, Chip Reed is covering for us down there. Chip?
Yeah, Scott, this is an interesting crowd. I know you've had kind of blocks of protesters and then blocks of supporters in other areas, but here we've got a real mixture. You've got people, a lot of people with Make America Great Again hats standing right next to people with signs saying Trump equals swastika and things like that. So you've really got an interesting mix of people, some cheering, some booing and screaming and saying four-letter words, all standing right next to each other and treating each other fairly cordially, by the way. There really has been no pushing and shoving or any kind of obvious disagreeableness, but people standing right next to each other and vehemently disagreeing with each other in how they react to President Trump. Scott?
Chip Reed, thank you, Chip. Well, it's been a little bit less cordial in other parts of Washington. There were protests earlier, and now we have our Jeff Pegues, you see right there. There seems to be a fire as well. Jeff, what are you seeing?
Yeah, Scott, we're in one of the protest zones at 13th and K, and you see right over here, you see this limo. This was one of the vehicles that was vandalized earlier, and now someone has set it on fire, and I am concerned that this car, it could go up in flames even further. But you see, the crowd is growing here. There's no sense of structure to what's going on, and now we see the police moving in. Finally, we see the police moving in to take control, because I wonder how fast they can get the fire department over here to put this fire out. Because if it intensifies, there's a really good chance that this car could... Here we go. Here we go. They're moving the crowd back. They're moving the crowd back. We're going with them. Police have their gear, they have their pepper spray, and they're trying to control the crowd. But frankly, this is something that is perhaps long overdue, because for several minutes now, this crowd has just been building here. They've been kicking in the windows of these vehicles over my shoulder, and then finally someone set the limo on fire.
Jeff, have you seen or heard about anyone being hurt?
No, not yet. But we know that there have been about 95 arrests. Some police officers have been injured. But here at 13th and K, in the last hour or so, we have not seen anyone injured. However, that could change. You just notice police with the pepper spray. And over that line of police, we see the fire engine, the fire truck finally coming to the scene, because they're going to try to get this fire under control. Scott?
And the police officers have to make the area secure for the firemen to be able to do their work. Fran Townsend, when your job is protecting the president, protests like this are a problem because they're a massive distraction for the security forces.
That's exactly right. But I will tell you, I was speaking yesterday with a member of the Washington Metropolitan Police Department, and they're really taking the primary responsibility for the protests because that's outside the bubble. Let's remember, we have it on a split screen. This is several blocks away from where the president's inaugural parade is. And so the local Metropolitan Police Department takes responsibility. They coordinate with the Secret Service. The information is fed into the command post, but those are Metropolitan Police officers, and they'll have Secret Service with them.
Well, we're watching a split-screen day. The 45th President of the United States in his armored limousine approaching the environs of the White House, and on the other side of the screen, the protests elsewhere in Washington. Police have been using flashbang concussion grenades on the crowd in order to disperse them. They've used pepper spray on the crowd, and what you're seeing in the background is the remnants of a fire Jeff Pegues was telling us about. Someone had set an automobile on fire. Jeff, what is happening now?
Well, Scott, they seem to have gotten this fire under control. Let's move over here. Tony Furlow is operating the camera for me. You can see through here. They're putting water on the smoke and flame, so they're trying to get the situation under control. And the good thing is the crowd has calmed down because you see this line of police officers here with their shields, some with pepper spray. But the situation has calmed down quite a bit. Scott?
Jeff Pegues reporting for us with our cameraman Tony Furlow there in the protests. There has been some damage in the city. We saw protesters with hammers smashing out windows earlier, but the police have been able to disperse these crowds fairly efficiently, and it doesn't seem that things have gotten too far out of hand during these protests around the periphery of the inaugural ceremonies. Jan Crawford is in the parade, and Jan, tell us where we are now. It looks to me like you're going by the Treasury, and you'll soon be making a left onto the pedestrian way in front of the White House.
That is right, Scott, and we are getting very close to making that left turn that will then be right where the White House is. And so you can hear they're announcing those who are coming up ahead. Smaller crowds are through here, though, as we're getting closer to the White House, Scott. But the president is back there somewhere. We can't see him as well right now, but it's still kind of toward the end of the parade. And he will then, of course, go and take his place in the reviewing stand and sit there and be able to watch what is going to be about 8,000 people in this parade, marching bands, members of the military, and assorted groups as they finish the parade in front of the White House, Scott.
And they're running about an hour late. The presidential limousine was supposed to arrive at the White House at 3:35 Eastern Time, and we're starting to close in on 4:30 at this point. So they'll be a little over an hour late by the time they get around there. There's been a very large reviewing stand built right in front of the White House, and that is where Donald Trump and the first family and the vice president and his family will be watching the rest of the parade go by. The bands and other performers that Jan Crawford was just telling us about. That's the presidential review stand there. As you can see, the White House in the background, the North Lawn there behind, and the president will be watching from that stand as the parade unfolds. But certainly running late. As we see the presidential motorcade make that left turn back onto Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House, we want you to hear this program note that we have. Gayle King and John Dickerson are going to bring you a CBS News primetime special tonight called Change and Challenge, the inauguration of Donald Trump. That is tonight on CBS at 8/7 Central Time, and you won't want to miss that.
Do you want a stray thought?
I love a stray thought. Bob Woodward.
That Trump is not one who would be a person who keeps a diary. But wouldn't it be fascinating if he did, and if you know, what's inside, and if he sat down and said, these are the 3 things I want to accomplish. What are they, and what is the priorities? Because in a way, that's the way business people think. You know, what do I want to accomplish? How do I make more money? How do I stabilize? So he's got...
The president's limousine has stopped. Secret Service is opening the door. He is nearly in front of the White House at this point on the part of Pennsylvania Avenue that's a pedestrian mall. So for the second time, he's stepping out with his young son, Barron. You get a sense of the doors on the limousine there and how incredibly thick they are. And there is the First Lady joining him, hand in hand. Joining us now is Dan Senior, who was an advisor to Paul Ryan when he was running for vice president on the Republican ticket. And Dan, I wonder what you thought of President Trump's inauguration speech. Certainly was different.
It was different. It was a sort of declaration a declaration of action against both parties. He ran for president against both parties. He effectively ran as an independent, but he sort of leased the Republican Party line. And what you heard today is he basically said, I've got an agenda, and I'm going to work to implement it, and I will turn my fire on whoever stands in the way, including many of the people who are standing standing right around him. Democrats, Republicans, it doesn't matter. So he's in this sort of improbable marriage with the congressional leadership right now, the Republican congressional leadership. They need him. They need him to get things they want done accomplished because he attracts political support that they don't have.
But he needs them.
He needs them. And one, look, he couldn't get tax reform done had Paul Ryan not been slaving away at the Ways and Means Committee for years. He probably wouldn't be able to get his first choice for the Supreme Court for Justice Scalia's successor in place had Mitch McConnell not done what he had done to prevent Obama's nominee from getting a vote. So he needs their expertise. That's what I mean. This is an improbable marriage.
Now it appears that the President, First Family are getting back in the limousine, but on the left-hand side of your screen, you see our correspondent Jeff Begaze at the site of that earlier protest, and I'm hearing the flashbang grenades going off again. Jeff, what do you see?
Well, Scott, this has deteriorated even more. I didn't think I'd be saying that, but that's what's happening here. People are ripping bricks off the cement, and then they're throwing them at the police officers. And the police officers are now responding. So
the police officers mason tear gas us.
So you're hearing both sides out here, but we see police responding to the protesters, and really, they aren't protesters. There are people in the crowd. They have masks on their faces. They're picking up the bricks and they're throwing them at the police officers who are now responding. The police, over the last 15 minutes or so, have been trying to clear this street to no avail. You can see all these people gathered in the street. We're on K Street between 14th and 13th. Thousands of people here, some covering their faces as a result of the pepper spray and the flashbangs, others with bricks in their hands. Some of these folks are throwing these bricks. Don't block our camera. Don't block our camera. Why are you throwing bricks? Don't block our camera.
What you see on the left-hand side of the screen is a car that the protesters set on fire right there. The fire department came, put the car out. The police have been trying to disperse the crowd with pepper spray, as Jeff Begay said, and these concussion grenades that are designed to make a loud noise, but also designed not to harm anyone. I should note that this protest, like the others, is distant from the festivities of the inauguration. This is several blocks away. It is not likely anyone who has come out to see the president has seen or heard anything like this. The National Mall and its environs have been locked down by the security services and made a safe zone for the inauguration to take place. Jeff Begay, if you can still hear me, what is happening where you are now?
But our self-interest also involves cooperating and collaborating with other nations.
Jeff Begay?
We're Americans. What's wrong?
Scott, can you hear me?
I hear you, Jeff. What are you seeing?
All right, now we're seeing a protest that has now developed all of a sudden. Police are standing back, and this crowd is gathered near police, and they're saying, hands up, don't shoot. Now we're being pushed back by police again. Over my shoulder, there's been pepper spray in the air trying to get the crowd to move back. And you just saw a brick. They're throwing bricks again at the police officers who are trying to protect themselves with their shields. So this goes back and forth. It's like an ebb and flow in this protest. You have people who are throwing bricks, and they move up and they start chanting again. So it's hard to tell minute to minute how this is going to change. And you're hearing bangs again here as well. But here's the thing, Scott. The crowd is not dispersing. It's getting bigger. It's not dispersing.
Jeff Begay's covering the protests a few blocks away from the presidential entourage. At this point, what we have in sum with these protests today is a number of smashed storefront windows. At least one car has been burned, and the Metropolitan Police have arrested about 100 people at this point, and a few police officers, judging from the video, have been injured. This is the inaugural parade. That is the review stand directly in front of the north face of the White House, and it looks like they have opened the doors of the limousine again, but I did not see the first family emerge. Jan Crawford, you are with the parade. Tell us what's happening there right now.
Well, as we're waiting for the president, the first lady, and the first family to take their places in the reviewing stand, the crowds, and you can hear the announcement, "Welcome home, Mr. President," as this crowd is, of course, very supportive, and you can hear the cheers as the president and the first lady review now right in front of their new home. God, I mean, as you said, there were reports of rain, but it's actually been quite nice. He was able to get out of the car twice. Once, of course, on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the Justice Department, and then he got here on this plaza in front of Pennsylvania Avenue that runs in front of the White House, and you can hear the cheers as they continue down Pennsylvania Avenue.
As we watch the president, the first lady, and their young son, Barron, let's go to Margaret Brennan. Margaret?
Scott, as you watch the first family walk those last few yards to the gates to their new home, it's interesting to note that it's really only a few yards that the president has now been allowed to walk on foot. He's been getting in and out of that motorcade, as you mentioned. The security here obviously is very tight on Pennsylvania Avenue, as you would expect. But interesting, given how locked down it is, that he didn't walk the length of this less than half block between where I am and where the front door is. I will say, Scott, we don't know why. I can't get an answer, frankly, from security officials on the ground here as to why the bleachers behind me are empty. But immediately on this street behind me, next to the Treasury, there are about 5 lengths of bleachers that are empty right now. The crowds that you're seeing around the president are really gathered closer to the front gate of the White House, next to where the VIPs are sitting behind that bulletproof glass. So you haven't really been able to get the sense of a large crowd, but obviously the key VIPs are gathered and cheering him on right now. I did ask Tom Barrack, who is the chair of the inaugural committee, who really planned a lot of these festivities. I shouted out to him as he drove by, "How's it going? How do you feel about this, sir?" He gave me a thumbs up. He said, "This is all beautiful." So the man planning it is very happy. Again, don't know why we are seeing these empty bleachers here for a good half length of Pennsylvania Avenue, but we are seeing now the president towards the gates of the White House getting welcomed by so many of those individuals who helped plan this. And they really, the crowd pleaser, I have to say, appears to be the small children, Ivanka's children, who were being held by Jared Kushner, close advisor to the president, and others. So the kids are really the crowd pleaser, but really not everyone here got to see the length of that walk, Scott.
Margaret Brennan covering the parade for us. Margaret, thank you very much. You know, let me bring in the unique insight of Dan Senior, who was working in Baghdad for the George W. Bush administration as a senior advisor to the coalition there. Donald Trump today, Dan, said that he would wipe radical Islamic terrorism off the face of the earth, which would make him the third president now to say that.
Yeah.
What are some of the complexities?
Well, first of all, I think every president should be cautious about overpromising an inaugural address. He said he was going to wipe out violent Islamic extremism. He was going to eradicate crime from the streets of the United States. These are big challenges and high expectations to set. I think the biggest challenge he faces in this regard is it is very hard to wage any war against terrorism without alliances, traditional American alliances. I mean, think about what NATO did for America after September 11th. Think about how many nations were involved with us in Iraq. Think about the close working relationships we have in combating terrorism around the world. And the capitals of the traditional Western, American-led Western alliance system and parts of Asia are jittery right now. They are very worried that we are not going to be there. And you heard today, he did say, the president said in his inaugural address, we will stay true to old alliances, which is not nothing, which is important. He was trying to reassure, I think, our NATO allies. But he also said we're going to look at new alliances. Well, who are those new alliances? It sounds like it's probably Russia. That will make a lot of our traditional allies nervous. It's hard to do anything, let alone defeat radical Islam, on our own.
NATO has been fighting al-Qaeda in Afghanistan for 15 years. And yet Donald Trump says NATO's obsolete.
Yeah,
he doesn't see it as part of the war on terror.
Yeah, well, he, I think, believes that NATO exists to protect interests that don't matter to us. I mean, that is a growing view in the conservative movement. In fairness, it's not just Donald Trump. You are seeing this growing, school of thought that why is it in America's interest if Russia rolls into Estonia or Lithuania? What do we care about what happens in big parts of Western Europe? And so those questions are being raised by Donald Trump and others.
Dan Senior, Dan, thank you very much. The presidential limousine now turning onto... Sorry, I'm just trying to make that out. That's the Eisenhower Executive Office Building.
17th Street. They're turning down.
What has always been known as the old Executive Office Building. Now they're turning there, and the parade is about an hour and 10 minutes late at this point. But we will be expecting the president to be getting out of the limousine with the first family and the vice president and taking their seats here at this reviewing stand to watch the rest of the parade as it proceeds through Washington. But it's getting to be 5 o'clock Eastern time, and sunset will not be too far away. So, Fran Townsend, they have gotten through the thing that makes you and all security people the most nervous.
That's exactly right. So the car is being brought around to the south gate, where he'll go in the south gate entrance. It allows, in fairness, the first family now to have a moment to use the bathroom, to get blankets or sweaters or anything they want for their own comfort, and to freshen up before they come out into the reviewing stand.
They're entering the house for the first time as their house.
That's exactly right. And the staff, the remarkable thing, Scott, you mentioned it with Andy Card, is not only is the Oval Office been completely turned over and around, but also the residence has. And there's a professional, long-standing professional staff in the residence that will be sure that they have drinks and snacks for them and things waiting for them, and anything they might need before they go out to the reviewing stand.
Presidents come and go, but the White House staff is a constant in many respects.
And the residents in particular, they're really wonderful in taking care of the first family and the president's staff.
Bob Woodward, the president made a lot of promises in his inaugural address. He's got his work cut out for him.
He sure does. And where he kept saying, "I will never let you down." Who's the you? The implication was his voters, the American public, and so forth. But again, as I was saying earlier, he comes from that culture of overstatement, and for him to say he's going to wipe the Islamic State off the face of the earth is not surprising. As long as there's not a terror, as Fran knows so well, another terrorist, high casualty attack in this country, he's going to be fine. But that is the thing that gives you the lump in your stomach 24/7,
Yeah,
doesn't
absolutely.
it?
We're joined now by John Dickerson, the anchor of Face the Nation, our CBS News political director. You know, John, it occurred to me as the parade rolled down Pennsylvania Avenue, it was a little bit of a microcosm of America. You had supporters and protesters, all the way down the street.
That's right. And in today's reaction to this speech, that you've been talking about, Donald Trump loves to keep the room engaged, loves to keep them up, and loves. I was talking to a Republican lawmaker this week who said, how are we in the boring making of legislation going to give him the things that he can go to rallies and get everybody still excited about? Well, he gave a speech to keep the crowd in front of him excited, but that other crowd, the crowd of people who are nervous about his presidency, are now, if his supporters are more excited, the others are more nervous.
And Bob Woodward, the president-elect comes into office, or I should call him the president, of course, since noon today. The president comes into office with the lowest approval rating of any president in modern times, about 35% in the CBS News poll, which is the lowest we've seen since we started asking that question in 1981.
Yeah, and that can go up and that can actually go down. He said in that speech, he said, this is the hour of action. And that is a very broad statement, and people are going to be asking, what are the acts? What are you going to do? And we are going to, in our business, I think very aggressively, hopefully fairly, chart all of those actions and try to measure the impact of them. But not just in terms of how does that correlate with his promise in the campaign, but what's the impact on people? I mean, he's made a big... He said to his supporters, you can count on me forever.
One of the greatest reporters Washington has ever seen, Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just want to add, so he spoke to his supporters today, but a president does have to persuade. I mean, we used to think of the presidency as the art of persuasion. And so a speech in which he did not sound the notes to get that other part of the country on his side is a missed opportunity, but also it suggests how is he going to persuade in office? Now, some people would argue things are so partisan now there is no persuading anymore. Well, what happens when he tries to do something difficult and the country doesn't like it? How does he make the case if he has not prepared the ground, or if he just doesn't rhetorically want to do that? it's a real challenge for his presidency and how he tries to get the country behind his ideas.
Well, the inaugural address was very much Donald Trump versus Washington, and Washington in all of its forms, Republican and Democrat. In fact, it had the feel of calling Washington a corrupt and venal place.
Absolutely. I mean, he essentially pointed the finger for all of the country's difficulty. He pointed the finger at the people arrayed around him to applaud his inauguration. They were the ones who let the country down, and he went further. He went to their motives. He said they wanted to make their lives comfortable at the expense of yours. That is some strong mustard. And what's interesting about the reactions I've gotten from people on the Hill is they're already saying, well, that's rhetoric, and we're going to just go about our business. The gap between rhetoric and what they're actually going to deal with when they make legislation will be one of the fascinating questions going forward.
Well, many people have said, John, and you've been following the campaign from its very first day, that when Donald Trump is nominated, he'll be different. When Donald Trump faces the challenges of being president, he'll be different. And I think the lesson that we've learned again and again today is that this is Donald Trump, and he is not different.
That's exactly right. But then the question is, when it comes to making legislation, will he have the other part of Donald Trump, which is he offers a big opening gambit, a really strong position. And when you talk to people who've worked with him in business, you know, they say in negotiation, you set yourself way out here on the extreme, so you know you're going to negotiate back to the middle. And so that's the other part of his personality. And our question is he going to be the Donald Trump 100% maximalist of his rhetoric, or is he going to be the negotiator who then kind of puts together a deal, declares victory no matter what the outcome, and moves on to the next deal?
Fran Townsend, your expertise is in Homeland Security. That was your job in George W. Bush's administration. What does this administration, what does President Trump need to pay attention to ensure the security of the homeland?
So, I mean, I think he laid it out in his inaugural address, and this was the bold statement that he was going to put an end, if you will, to Islamic extremism. Certainly that's a threat. He didn't mention cyber, which I think is the other great threat of our time. And then there's the sort of geopolitical challenges, none of which he didn't mention the foreign policy stuff, Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. He stayed away from that in an effort, as John points out, to talk to his supporters and rally and reassure them.
Now, the president and the first family at this point are presumably in the White House, refreshing themselves before they come out to the reviewing stand for the parade. And Margaret Brennan is down there for us at this point. Margaret?
Scott, we're watching the vice president walk by. He's actually responding to some of the reporters, people shouting out to him. He is walking the stretch of Pennsylvania Avenue. You can see right now he's passing the empty bleachers, but getting close to that area where the VIPs are sitting. And what I can tell you is that the president himself, Donald Trump, once he gets inside the White House, he will have some downtime before he gets to parties tonight. We had been expecting a number of executive actions or orders, that swift action they had promised, to be happening today. But now we are hearing from Sean Spicer, the White House spokesperson, the new White House spokesperson, that a lot of those actions will likely be pushed off until Monday. Today, Donald Trump may look at a few things, he may review a few options, but he's likely going to wait before signing off on anything till Monday. So not the shock and awe in Washington that they promised immediately, but he's going to actually enjoy himself in this inaugural tonight, it sounds like. You can hear the crowd here on the ground. Mike Pence and his wife really getting a warm greeting from the revelers, and he really is responding to the cameras and responding to the people who are gathered here. Donald Trump did that swift movement back to his motorcade, not walking the stretch of Pennsylvania up to the front door. So they have a long and fun night ahead for them, but it sounds like a lot of this work will be pushed off until Monday, the first big day in the office for the Trump administration.
Margaret Brennan for us. Margaret, thank you very much. And we're joined again by Anthony Mason, who's been following the events of the day.
I'm struck, Scott, in watching Mike Pence. This is something I thought about earlier when we were talking about the new cabinet and the administration. Mike Pence, as vice president, has the lowest net worth of anybody in the new Trump administration. There are 5 billionaires in the senior administration. There are 5 former CEOs. These are, as Mr. Trump has said, very successful people. What did he say last night? I think he said that they have the highest IQ. We can't, I think, establish that.
He said they had collectively the highest IQ of any cabinet ever assembled.
Yeah, but I don't think we can check that fact. But we can check the net worth of these guys, and it's somewhere up around $10 billion. So it's a pretty unusual bunch.
That suggests perhaps a high IQ.
Yeah, it might. It might. But Mike Pence, with his net worth, is about $800,000, and that makes him the poorest man in the administration.
Now, the parade is supposed to wrap up in 25 minutes, and it hasn't begun yet. They are running more than an hour late, and now they are going to be pushing twilight here pretty soon. But here comes the parade following up the presidential limousine.
We talk about Mike Pence is going to be one of the busiest. Is going to be quite busy on Monday. He is charting a new role for the vice president. They've always dealt with Congress, or at least Dick Cheney and Joe Biden did. But Mike Pence is dealing with Congress in a much more day-to-day, hour-to-hour way. You don't just bring him in for the kind of last stage of negotiation. He's really he's basically doing congressional liaison work, having obviously been a member of Congress, knows a lot of folks up there, and has good relationships.
John, how strong is the relationship, do you think, between Pence and Congress, and between Paul Ryan and Pence in particular?
It's a good relationship between Paul Ryan and Mike Pence for this reason. They both see the world ideologically the same way. Donald Trump, actually, and Paul Ryan are at very different places ideologically, obviously on trade, on entitlements, and on budget measures. But Mike Pence and Paul Ryan are conservatives who kind of believe in the same set of ideology. They know the shorthand of legislation, and that's going to be crucial because not only does Donald Trump not know how the sausage is made when it comes to legislation, but also his chief of staff, Reince Priebus, is a political guy. He's not somebody who came up through the political system. So in terms of translating, 2 things Mike Pence has got to do. He's got to be a Trump whisperer, which is to say, explain to Congress what Donald Trump really means when he calls them all out for the ruin that the country is in, blames them. Does he really mean it? He's got to translate Donald Trump back to Congress, and then translate Congress back to Donald Trump in terms of, hey, I know you want Obamacare to be repealed and replaced by tomorrow, but the following things are happening, and they're not the result of venality or stupidity. It's just the way the place works, and you're just going to have to be okay with that.
From what you've seen in administration, how quickly do those kind of relationships develop in an administration?
Interesting, Mike Pence is in a unique position because remember, he served, right? He's also been a governor. Mike Pence is uniquely positioned and has been working it. We've seen him up on Capitol Hill an awful lot during the transition period, renewing those relationships, warming them back up. He's quite well respected, and although there are plenty on the Democratic side of the aisle that disagree with him on things like social issues, traditional conservative values, I think he's respected, he's listened to. They think he is a thoughtful interlocutor and somebody that they can deal with, and so I think he's a very, very important member of that Trump team, and can be very effective for the president in pretty short order, frankly, because of those relationships.
Well, I would imagine that the speed with which that develops is kind of important.
That's right, and for Mike Pence, because they're pre-existing, I think it's faster than you'd expect from anybody else who hadn't served the time he served there.
All right, our coverage of the inauguration parade will continue in a moment. You're watching CBS.
Blades, 11.5 moisture strips. It's the best shave that will ever be possible.
Didn't you guys say that about the last one?
No, that one only had 11 moisture strips. Primitive. And next-gen breakthroughs, like this laser chin detection system, don't come cheap. Let me look into financing options for you.
Hey man, you don't need to pay for all that to get a great shave when you can ride up on this for just a few bucks.
Try our best razor for $1 with free shipping at dollarshaveclub.com.
To be your best, you have to apply yourself. I apply myself every day.
Gold Bond Men's Lotion. Everyday moisture hydrates dry skin. Intensive therapy keeps extra dry skin smooth with 7 intensive moisturizers and skin strengthening proteins. Man up.
When every ingredient counts, count on Bush's chili beans, simmered in a flavorful chili sauce with garlic, cumin, and onions. For chili you can't wait to taste.
Chili's ready!
Bush's chili beans, made for chili.
The inauguration of America's 45th president, Donald Trump. Stay with CBSN for complete coverage streaming on your favorite device. CBSN, always on.
Welcome back to CBS News' continuing coverage of the inaugural parade of the 45th president, Donald Trump. I'm joined by Michael Gerson, who's a columnist for The Washington Post, and Jamelle Bouie, who is Slate Magazine's chief political correspondent. Michael, let's start with you. Next week, the work begins. It looks like Donald Trump's going to wait to do the heavy stuff till Monday. What do you think that week looks like for him and then for Congress? How do they get their damn steps in order?
Well, the thing that I think they have a lot of the groundwork done is the reversal of executive orders. There were actually working groups in the Federalist Society for months on this topic and different environmental regulations, other things. I think that'll roll out. But then he has a choice. Does he go after the dreamers? Does he do undo the executive order, which changed enforcement, allowing young people who had come here as children to stay in the country? That's a sympathetic group. It would be a sign of aggression if he were to do this. So we'll see. So,
Jamelle, what's your sense of how Democrats, who are probably rethinking things, there was some in that speech today that Bernie Sanders probably liked, but mostly they're thinking about opposition to Donald Trump. What does their week look like next week?
I think they're still preparing for the inevitable attempts to move the process forward and repealing the Affordable Care Act. They're looking at the confirmation hearings. We're still making our way through that process, and they're still making strategic choices about who they're going to put forth most of their energy in opposing for confirmation. You're already sort of looking at the hearings last week or this past week. You get the sense that nominees like Betsy DeVos and Rex Tillerson are kind of on the people they're probably going to oppose pretty vigorously list, while like Nikki Haley, the South Carolina governor, who's the nominee for UN ambassador, is probably going to escape that kind of scrutiny.
Michael Gerson, what do you think? Mike Pence, I was talking about his role. What do you think? What's your take on his role and how crucial he'll be to Donald Trump?
I think he's the ambassador to the Congress in a certain way from the administration. He explains them and he does outreach. So I think that's true. He was not, when he was in the House of Representatives, a moderate.
No, he gave George W. Bush a lot of grief.
Strong conservative that, gave George Bush a lot of grief on Medicare Part D, on other issues. It's interesting now that he's viewed as a voice of reason in the administration, kind of a conduit where if members of Congress want to get things done, I think they will do outreach to Pence.
I think part of the complication here, right, will be that what the Republican Congress has on deck sounds very different than what Donald Trump has proposed or what he's talking about. So he gave the interview about health care where he promised, basically promised everyone would be able to get health insurance. And you saw Republican lawmakers say, cool off about that. There'll be access to health insurance. We're not going to promise universal coverage. And I think Pence will exist in part to maybe try to translate some of Trump's rhetoric to Republican lawmakers and maybe kind of smooth over the, not rough edges, but the real gaps that seem to exist there.
Yeah, and there's some differences in priorities here. I think infrastructure is here for the president. I think it's down here for Paul Ryan. I think tax reform's up here for Paul Ryan, and maybe down here for President Trump. So in those areas where Trump and Ryan overlap, they're going to get things done very quickly, I think. But there are disagreements in priorities.
Bob Schieffer has joined us. Bob, we're also going to see early, maybe in the next couple of weeks, a Supreme Court nomination from Donald Trump. What do you think that will do to an already kind of busy Washington?
Well, I don't think that it's going to join them. We'll see any joining together here. I mean, because whoever Donald Trump picks, it's going to be controversial because, well, for all the obvious reasons. We don't need to state them here. This is something that the nation is split on. The issues that have to be divided by the court, the women's issues, all of that, constitutional issues. They're just, there are legitimate, strong disagreements. So whoever he picks, I think it's going to be a difficult ride.
And I think there are also some on the Democratic left, especially, who feel very resentful about what happened with Merrick Garland and who feel that the refusal to have a hearing on Garland during Obama's last year in office is something that needs to be answered in some way, shape, or form. So I have a sense that any Supreme Court nominee Trump puts forward is going to come not in just for your typical criticism, but maybe even calls for a similar kind of blockade.
Yeah, there might be just a little bit of revenge in some of the opposition.
It's a poison process. Those judicial nominees are very much a poison process.
Michael Gerson, one of the things where the Senate is apparently now voting on James Mattis to be Secretary of Defense, one of the things I've heard from Senate Republicans, and Mitch McConnell essentially said this on Face the Nation, was that those who are worried about Donald Trump's position on Russia, they're very happy to have James Mattis around because they think he has a clear-eyed view about Vladimir Putin, what a threat he is to NATO, and that America needs to respond.
Yeah. It's true also with the DNI, Dan Coates, the Director of National Intelligence, who's very much a Russia hawk in this as well. So there is a huge division, though. Mattis would not have given that inaugural speech, which was deeply isolationist in rhetoric and intent. It questioned some of our most basic commitments in Asia and Europe. So there's a big difference between what I saw in that speech and what Rex Tillerson and General Mattis represent in their whole careers.
The other thing, John, is that a lot of Democrats want to get Mattis confirmed. It's kind of tweet insurance because you take people like Amy Klobuchar, Democrat, they're very worried that in foreign capitals, no one will really know who speaks for America right now. And, with these tweets coming at all hours of the day and night sometime, and we have no idea if they're going to continue or not, I think it'll be very important to get somebody in there like Mattis confirmed, and so when he speaks, people will know he's actually speaking for the government.
And I heard another version of that, which Mattis has standing, 4-star general with Donald Trump. And so if he goes to Donald Trump and says, this, because of my experience in relationships with foreign capitals, this is causing a problem and you need to correct it, that Democrats hope Mattis has a kind of strength with Donald Trump where he might be able to get through. Jamel, Democrats do they have a particular nominee that they would like to focus in on? I mean, one above all that they would not like to see confirmed, do you think?
I know among sort of activists, kind of a lot of the focus is on DeVos. I never can remember.
Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education.
Or on DeVos and on Jeff Sessions for the Department of Justice. And I know with Sessions in particular, there's a lot of worry about his position on police reform. There's a lot of worry about his position on voting rights, and that activists, at least, are not very satisfied with where Sessions stands. And certainly, I think it was clear from the confirmation hearings, it's clear from the conversation around here that Democrats are very unsatisfied with the boss.
And that's really a shame, because we were prepared as a nation to do criminal justice reform in many ways. People in the libertarian right, conservatives, were concerned about the level of incarceration, people on the left as well. That doesn't seem to be very much on the table anymore. That looks like a lost opportunity.
Right. It looks like, I mean, policy-wise, it looks like we're about to take a swing towards more draconian punishment, despite the fact that crime is falling, violent crime is falling, that the policy consensus is that we're a bit too punitive.
Here we see a band from Tennessee. Sounds like they're playing Rocky Top there as a part of the inaugural parade. Bob, what's your sense in the Senate? Things are you need 60 votes, and so a speech like the one Donald Trump gave today, if you believe the commentary that this was just to his base, he has a favorability rating of 40%. Well, you need to get 60 votes. Is Donald Trump going to put up with the slowness of a Senate that needs 60 votes, and are they going to be able to get 60 votes?
He may have no choice. This was a speech for the people who put Donald Trump up on that podium taking that oath of office today. There was no sense of outreach whatsoever. But the Senate is a very different place. John, and you and I have talked about that. I was in the Senate just before the Republican convention began, and not a single Republican Senate leader that I talked to, I couldn't find a single one who thought he was going to win. They were all worried about losing their majority. He was not particularly popular up there. I think one of the things we may see happen, we may see a new kind of bipartisan foreign policy here that includes people like Lindsey Graham and John McCain on one side, and then some people, Democrats, on the other side, that may form a coalition. Maybe, I'm not saying against Donald Trump, but will provide alternatives to some of the things that he might advocate. But at this point, we don't know. Mm-hmm. And that's the lesson of this campaign. We simply don't know. And a lot of Democrats you talk to, a lot of people in the foreign policy community, especially Democrats and Republicans, and those who have worked in administrations, Democratic and Republican, they think the real danger here for the country is when other nations don't know what the U.S. policy is, don't know how we feel about our alliance allies. And that's where I think you may see this coming together of Democrats and Republicans on some sort of a consensus.
And now we hear that they've come together on a consensus of James Mattis, who's now been approved.
Yeah, I would just add that if the president and his office, the executive, impinges on the rights of the legislature, the biggest institutionalist is Mitch McConnell. He will defend the rights of his institution. He believes in the process. So I think we can expect that there might be a little pushback from leadership of Congress if he goes over some bounds as well.
And I think one of the X factors in all of this is just the fact that Donald Trump enters office quite unpopular. And I'm not sure how that figures into his agenda moving forward. It's one thing for a popular president to have a kind of closely divided Congress and can push through policy using his popularity. But when you enter office already with a substantial deficit and you are pushing some quite controversial policies and you have a narrow majority, there are a lot of places where nervous lawmakers have a chance to jump off forward.
Exactly.
That is going to, I think that will be a problem for Donald Trump, especially after he gets past his honeymoon.
Every president's power comes from how popular he is and how much support that the Congress thinks he has out there among the American people. Because the one thing that the people in Congress understand is power, and if they sense a weakness, they'll run right over it.
And although he does have a kind of special power with their base in the Republican Party, which you worry, if you're a Republican lawmaker, they're worried that he might turn his Twitter account against them. And though he's not broadly popular, he's very, very popular among their base voters. Michael, I want to ask you a question about persuasion. The art of the presidency used to be about the art of persuasion, both inside the building and in the public. Give us your sense of whether that's still true with respect to this theory. How does Donald Trump use the power of the bully pulpit to convince that portion of the country that isn't already with him? He chose not to do it today. Does he need to, or are we so partisan that it's basically just make sure your team is with you, get your legislation through, and you don't need in the old-fashioned way to kind of go and build a big national consensus?
Yeah, there are people who have given up on centrist politics, the possibility of persuasion, the possibility of coalitions, genuine bipartisan coalitions. I think that that's a terrible mistake. When George W. Bush was elected after a very difficult election where he lost the popular vote as well, one of his first calls was to Ted Kennedy about No Child Left Behind. And you have to reach out, particularly in the Senate, to responsible Senate members. If you're going to have signature achievements, if you're going to really get things done, you can't just do executive orders. You need to have the Congress agree.
And Jamel, we heard Donald Trump on election nights talk about unity, talk about reaching out to the other side, but he's done really nothing since then in that respect. He also, during the campaign, talked about how his view of deal-making was, you get both sides together and you work them out, but there's been no... Traditionally, presidents at least have nodded towards a bipartisan thing, but while he is an independent in a sense, attacking both sides, he's not really singing the traditional song of let's both get together, reason together.
I think part of this is that there is a genuine major ideological gap between the two sides. You're not going to be able to bring Democrats into the room for a deal on repealing the Affordable Care Act. That's the signature policy of the last president who was their president. You're not going to be able to do that. And so I think for Trump, if he wants that kind of bipartisan deal-making, you do have to begin to trim the sails of your agenda. And where the tension comes in is that, well, Trump is not. I don't think Trump is necessarily ideologically committed to things like a massive repeal of the Affordable Care Act or a massive change to distribution with Medicare and Medicaid. The Republican Congress certainly is. And so you have the Republican Congress with its own particular agenda. You have Trump, who sort of seems agenda agnostic on those issues. And then you have Democrats who have voters who feel that no cooperation is needed here, that we in fact won most of the votes in this election, so don't work with them.
Michael Gerson, do you think Trump is a Republican?
I think that he is a right-wing populist. And there are right-wing populists in Europe right now. So there's relations with UKIP and the National Front in France. And there is a genuine reaction against globalization, immigration, economic changes that come with global labor markets. So I think that he's in that category. He was a plurality winner in the Republican Party. He didn't win a majority. He was a plurality winner as President of the United States. He has never really been a majority figure in either the party or the country. So I don't know how he gets where he wants to go just with the framework that he has set out right now.
And we hear that there they are, the Trump family, after a brief respite in the new residence, are now making their way out of the White House onto what looks like the walkway into the reviewing stand. Let's go to Major Garrett, who is at the White House.
John, we have an answer for a couple of questions that have cropped up in the last couple of hours. Why those empty seats on the bleachers, right along Pennsylvania Avenue by the viewing stand? I've just been emailing with Tom Barrack, who's the chairman of the Presidential Inaugural Committee, and he said because things have run so far behind schedule, a lot of the VIPs, cabinet families, big donors, were trapped on Capitol Hill because the congressional luncheon ran so late. Tom Barrack also told me that the Secret Service and D.C. Metropolitan Police barricaded 5 times as many streets as they had in the past, and that people on Capitol Hill who wanted to make it to the parade route simply couldn't get there. Another complicating factor, John, which I think is interesting for all of us to consider, because of the delays, many of the female guests for these VIP seats are also attendees of the inaugural balls tonight. And given the choice of seeing the parade or getting home, and preparing in their inaugural gowns for the balls this evening, they decided to do the latter, go home and change, as opposed to being here for the parade. That's why the bleachers are so conspicuously empty. Tom Barrack said it wasn't for lack of demand. The VIPs, the donors had tickets, had seats, but couldn't make it here because of the delays and the road closures. And we see the first family making their way to the reviewing stand. They're not going to miss the parade and the part that runs by the White House here, but that does explain, at least partially, why there are so many empty seats on those bleachers right here at Pennsylvania Avenue. Traditionally, and based on my experience, one of the hardest tickets in town to get. The tickets have been gotten, they just can't be used.
It's John Meacham, author of many books, including one on Jackson, is quoted in the paper saying that the inauguration is the last thing a president can control. But apparently it's even hard to control things on Inauguration Day with logistics and all of the security around there. Bob, what's your sense of the festivities surrounding Donald Trump in terms of tonight and all the balls and all of that? Is this sort of the standard? Is that kind of standard for Donald for one of these inaugurals, or is it different this time?
Well, I think the Trump people, the answer they would give you is that he wants to get down to work. This is about business. It's not about glitzy parties and so forth. The other side of it is they had a very difficult time getting A-list entertainers to take part in any way in this. The crowd that came to the inaugural was much smaller that we have seen in recent years. I would estimate it at about a third of the people who came for Barack Obama's first inaugural. It's just not as big a deal. And I don't mean to, be deprecating toward the president and the new administration, but just didn't draw as big a crowd as it normally do.
Right now, hear what I think, the first hail to the chief for the new president.
The Vice President of the United States, Michael R. Pence, and Mrs. Karen Pence.
Mike Pence coming in now to the reviewing stand. We have yet to see Donald Trump emerge from
this is going to be a much shorter parade than
normally
is. When Eisenhower was president, I think it ran about 5 hours.
With the lassoing and it was they're going to have to turn it into a
They were talking
job.
about this being an hour and a half.
Yeah. There it is. The new President Trump and the new First Lady.
Unbelievable, beautiful. Thank you.
There you see the new president responding to a few shouted questions. Michael.
Yeah, however you try to dismiss it, it is a big deal when you go into the Oval Office for the first time, when you go into the West Wing for the first time. In 2001, at this point, I went into the West Wing, was in the Roosevelt Room, watched them take the portrait of Franklin Roosevelt down and put the one of Teddy Roosevelt up, which is a great tradition between the parties, and you feel tremendous honor to be there every day. So it is, for all these people who serve, it is a big deal.
Oh, yes.
The White House during the last few hours has been a flurry of activity, as they've been doing, as Michael described, but in every room, painting and changing. And was that still going on when you first checked in? It was still the smell of fresh paint? Here we are with the first.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump.
There's to watch the perhaps abbreviated or sped up parade, which is a bit behind schedule. We've been talking, Michael, about about next week and the actions of the new Trump administration. You mentioned the Dreamers and an executive action with relating to those who were brought here by their parents, or born in America to undocumented parents. What other early actions, in terms of the real effects, direct effects on people's lives, might we see?
I think the decisions about health care are going to have the greatest effect on people's lives. And in fact, though, the policy process at the White House has not made those decisions in many ways. Sometimes we are trying to interpret things that don't exist. And in fact, there is no plan yet that the administration has for repeal and replace. But they want to do it quickly, and Mitch McConnell says it's going to take time. So there's going to be a little push and pull there.
This, I'll add, is a real danger. The length of time it took Democrats to get the Affordable Care Act from conception through committee to passage did a number on its popularity, did a number on Obama's popularity, and I think Trump is in a bit of a precarious situation here, because if it does take a year and a half to get repeal and then replace, and through all of this you see kind of what Republicans brought to Democrats in 2000 and 2010, protests, House members facing angry crowds. It's going to be an issue.
And replace is not saving money for the most part. I mean, these are often very expensive policy alternatives. So
let me bring in Major Garrett here. Major, we were just talking about that moment when the new staff walks into the White House. The paint is still fresh from the quick paint job it's gotten, and just the moment of feeling a part of history. Tell us about the Trump staff.
Well, interestingly enough, John, I can tell you something that's a little bit of behind-the-scenes information. Steve Bannon, chief advisor to President Trump, one of the most powerful voices in what is going to be a set of 4 very powerful advisors to President Trump, just took a tour of the White House press area. And he was surprised how small our offices were, how cramped the quarters are. And as he said to me, very populist, very common man. I said, well, yes, now that you've seen it, can we stay? He said, well, yeah, I didn't think this was so populist, so ordinary in its composition. This looks pretty ordinary. We can live with this. And I said, well, then so can we. Now, that's not altogether that important to the American public, but it is suggestive of something that does happen when you arrive at the White House. Whatever notions you might have had about what it is or isn't are dissolved by your actual presence here. When you see where the press works, when you see what your office looks like, when you come upon the Oval Office, all of this architecture begins to convey its history and its institutional weight to you, and you respond to it differently. Mike Gerson described his experience coming into the West Wing in 2001. Mike and I used to be colleagues at U.S. News and World Report. We discussed that. It always is an enormous privilege for me to walk into these gates. So the White House talks to you all the time, whether you're a staffer or a reporter covering it. And that process is just beginning. And I think Steve Bannon, who I believe was one of the voices skeptical about the White House press corps, wondering if we might be better relocated elsewhere, is coming to a different appreciation of the architecture here, where we work, and how he might work with us, or at least deal with us, covering this president on a day-to-day basis.
States Military Academy.
Offering a salute there. Major, while we're on the question of Steve Bannon, let me just quickly get your take on his influence on the speech we heard today from Donald Trump. You mentioned his wry comments about populism. He's seen as, of course, the center of the intellectual thinking inside the White House about the nationalist populist message. What did you see in the speech with respect to that very important Trump advisor?
Well, that it was written by Stephen Miller, the policy director for the campaign and now for this incoming White House. And then as it was drafted and redrafted by President Trump, you could see Steve Bannon keeping that populist message front and center. I guarantee you the voices of Kellyanne Conway and Reince Priebus might have suggested softening here and there, other stanzas that maybe didn't even make it into the speech. Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, these two have been, for a good long while, at least in the closing days of the campaign, really driving this nationalist/populist message into Donald Trump's speeches. They did so in the closing days of the campaign, and they kept them there in the inaugural address.
And the next group will fine young men and women of the United States Army Reserve
the Trump family.
Brigade. The Expeditionary Command marching in today's parade
as they settle in and watch the parade.
And John, if I could offer another thought, if I could. So,
please, Major Gown.
So we're talking about Steve Bannon. I've had it described to me by several people who've been working very closely within the Trump transition, an interesting organizational situation for this president. And it goes like this. 4 people believe they're the chief of staff to President Trump. Steve Bannon is one of them. Kellyanne Conway is one of them. Reince Priebus, who actually holds the title, is another. And Jared Kushner is the 4th. And they may all have the kind of access and regular interaction with President Trump that may make them feel like a chief of staff, meaning the person who has the very last word and is most persuasive on key decisions for President Trump. Working that out will be a very important organizational task for this president and his advisors, and dealing with each other and their relationship to the president as decisions are made and as they are funneled up to the president. I think it's going to be a fascinating part of not only the organizational challenge, but putting this action agenda that the president talked about and has promised the country forward.
Here we see the City of New York Police Department. Michael Gerson, Major makes a great point about, and you worked in the White House where there was famously the Iron Triangle between Karen Hughes, Karl Rove, and Joe Albaugh. 3 very powerful people from George W. Bush's time in Austin all came to Washington. Andy Card, the chief of staff, was put in the mix.
We do want to welcome you as night falls on our nation's capital to our continuing coverage here on CBSN of a day of history and so much more here in Washington. Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Elliott.
And I'm Elaine Quijano. We join you from the National Mall. Donald John Trump is now the 45th President of the United States. A parade is finishing up in Washington to honor the Commander-in-Chief. President Trump, First Lady Melania, and son Barron are at the White House now, watching the festivities.
Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the Senate, in fact, has just confirmed retired General James Mattis as Donald Trump's defense secretary. Confirmation is now underway for General John Kelly. He would be the president's pick to lead the Homeland Security Department. Again, General Mattis is the first of Donald Trump's picks to be confirmed. However, earlier today and really throughout the afternoon here, there have been major happenings all across the streets of Washington, D.C., unrest and protests turning violent and chaotic.
This was the scene in downtown Washington earlier. Police using tear gas as demonstrations there turned violent. Authorities say roughly 95 people have been arrested by 2 p.m. Eastern.
But the moment of the day, of course, was the inaugural address of Donald Trump after taking the presidential oath of office. In his remarks, he vowed, among many things, to put America first. Let's take a listen to just some of the president's remarks.
Today, we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people. This is your day. This is your celebration. And this, the United States of America, is your country. What truly matters is not which party controls our government, but whether our government is controlled by the people. January 20th, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. We will no longer accept politicians who are all talk and no action, constantly complaining but never doing anything about it. It's time to remember that old wisdom our soldiers will never forget, that whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots. Together, we will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And yes, together, we will make America great again. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
Joining us is Alan Lichtman, presidential historian and distinguished professor of history at American University, and Linda Tran, a Democratic strategist and CBSN political contributor, also the co-founder of 270 Strategies, and Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
So first, Professor, I'd like to get your thoughts on what we just heard there, the excerpts from Donald J. Trump's inaugural address.
As an historian, several things struck me. First of all, the great inaugural addresses have been uplifting. Franklin Roosevelt saying we have nothing to fear but fear itself. John F. Kennedy saying don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. They don't denigrate the country as American carnage. They don't essentially declare war on the rest of the world. Secondly, what struck me was making this idea of America first, emblematic of the Trump presidency. That harkens back to one of the worst episodes in American history, the America First movement of the late 1930s and beginning of the 1940s, wanted to blind us to the horrors of Hitler and Nazi Germany. If they had their way, Hitler would have conquered all of Europe and killed 5 million more Jews. Thirdly, Trump is not a populist. You've heard that 1,000 times from the commentators. Populism was a 19th century American movement designed to curb and rein in the corporations that were controlling ordinary Americans. Trump is empowering the corporations. He's put Goldman Sachs in charge of the Treasury, ExxonMobil in charge of state. His policies would greatly advance corporate power in this country.
Interestingly, as well, Caitlin, we saw flanked by members of Congress with whom he will work and which the GOP has majorities in both houses. We heard one person called it an open war declared on Congress today. He laid so much of what he saw as the problems plaguing America at the feet of Congress. What did you make of that decision?
Well, it's really difficult to discern this speech from the ones that he's given on the campaign trail. And in those speeches, he went after Republicans and Democrats alike. I do think that while Republicans are excited to have a majority in Washington, they haven't had one in a long time, it also comes with a feeling of anxiousness. They're not quite sure what comes next. And we've seen over the course of the transition, there's a lot of uncertainty when dealing with Donald Trump when it comes to policy. Republicans have already started to figure that out when it comes to health care, when it comes to infrastructure, rebuilding projects, and so forth that Trump mentioned in this speech. So while Republicans are very excited today, very happy about this new transition, they also know that there is going to be some tension here and there. And I'm looking to see kind of what coalitions are built in this new administration, because it's not just going to be Trump and the Republicans.
But Linda, let me ask you, I thought it was interesting that at one point the president spoke of unity. He even quoted the Bible, saying the Bible tells us how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. We must speak our minds openly, debate our disagreements honestly, but always pursue solidarity. What did you think about that?
Well, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there, I think, both with the way that he comported himself on the campaign trail and in the speech itself. I mean, you saw some people on the sidelines of the inauguration parade today with signs that said things like, build a wall around Goldman Sachs. And of course, that really points points to his whole plan to build a wall along the border of Mexico. And there's no secret, of course, that, he's talked about having a Muslim registry and all these sorts of things which are literally the opposite of unity, literally the opposite of inclusiveness. So, I think it's hard for some people to swallow who've been following along all the way.
Professor, we again learned just as we came to air that retired General James Mattis had been confirmed, the first of Donald Trump's picks, as the Secretary of Defense. Interesting, however, there was a thrust in his remarks as well towards isolationism, not just putting America first, but putting America first, it would seem, and last. He really seemed to, if only philosophically, cut ties with the rest of the world. And it's been pointed out that people like General Mattis, people like Rex Tillerson, are not isolationists, at least not by description, certainly not by calling to this point. That is a striking philosophical stance to make, considering.
Absolutely. And remember, the original America First movement was entirely isolationist. They believed we should not get involved in European affairs, even if the great nation of Britain was about to go under Nazi rule. And Trump, though, is kind of veering between isolationism on the one hand and extreme interventionist nationalism on the other hand. On one hand, he says maybe NATO is obsolete, maybe we need not to get involved in the Middle East in such a way as we have before. But on the other hand, he says we are going to entirely eradicate radical Islamic terrorism. How in the world do you do that while withdrawing America into a shell? We know as long as radical terrorism flourishes around the world, they can penetrate any shell we put around the country. So we are going to see the greatest possible historic clash within the Trump administration in terms of how engaged we are in the world. Are we going to repudiate 50 or 60 years of American collective security policy or not? And how are we going to deal with Russia?
We do want to point out, as the marching band that you're seeing here does pass the viewing stand of the president and his family. I'm sorry, this is again, the band is from what school? This is the marching band of Talladega College. It is the only all-black marching band that will be performing in the events and the parade that has been making its way through the streets of Washington again. A striking bit of symbolism here, Linda, especially considering some of the remarks we heard today.
Yeah, I think that's right. And he's talked a lot about, our burning inner cities and made comments about crime that have not certainly been perceived very well, especially among African-American voters. And actually, Talladega took some fire when they accepted participation in the parade, and they weathered it, saying that, look, at the end of the day, this is about the office, not about the man. And so that's how they explained their participation. But certainly they've had a lot of criticism.
And Kaylin, as we see the symbolism here, it does bear mentioning. We just discussed General Mattis, Rex Tillerson. When you look at the cabinet that Donald Trump would hope to have confirmed, 13 of 15 white men. There are virtually no other groups represented. They are would be the wealthiest cabinet, if all confirmed, in history. Again, very interesting for a president who rode this wave of populism, invoking today the forgotten men and women of the country, throwing a speech that essentially played like red meat to the base. To see who he surrounded himself with.
Well, interestingly enough, when you talk to his supporters, and I talked to lots of people out on the mall today, kind of getting their thoughts about the coming administration, but also how Trump has handled the transition, and there is not a negative word to be said among these folks about this cabinet, because they say that Donald Trump has talked about these kinds of people in his kind of social circles before. It also draws, of course, that big contrast between who Donald Trump has interacted with and who he appealed to. And those are very different groups here. But you talk to his supporters and they're not really affected by these choices, even though they've been criticized for them. And you've seen lots of Democrats trying to paint this picture for the broader public, kind of paint the contrast between the messages Donald Trump had on the campaign trail and the people that he chose to help fulfill a lot of those promises. It is a contrast, but something that his supporters are not bothered by right now, at least.
Professor, let me ask you. Oh, you wanted to make a point. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on this point on foreign policy. Another place you need to look towards is North Korea. North Korea has said they're going to develop missiles capable of reaching the U.S. Donald Trump has said, quote, it won't happen.
That is a red line.
That is a red line.
Drawn.
And we need to watch that. Because is he going to enforce that red line? And if so, how is he going to do it? Because if a war is going to start, it's probably not going to start as a result of the Middle East or Russia. It's going to start as a result of that incredibly volatile border between North and South Korea. Every American needs to pay attention to that.
Are red lines the same for Donald Trump as they would be for other presidents?
Probably not, but you never know with Donald Trump. Barack Obama, we know, walked away from the red line in Syria, and I think probably wisely so. But Trump, you got to understand, Trump believes that he can impose his will on anything, because that's been his history. So when he says it won't happen, he believes it won't happen, but the rub is, how do you stop it from happening when dealing with an absolute dictator and probably a mentally unstable person like the ruler of North Korea, and dealing with a border where there are constant threats of war?
All right. Alan, Linda, Caitlin, thank you. And stand by. Our inauguration coverage continues after a short break. When we return, we'll check in on the protests taking place on the outskirts of the parade route. We're back after this. You're watching CBSN.
In for new razor?
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much. I don't really need anything fancy.
Well, right here's about your only option.
Is it any good?
Come on. What do you expect for a couple bucks? Lobster? I'll get the paperwork started.
Hey, man, don't settle for that shave when you can ride off on this for about the same price.
Try any amazing razor for $1 with free shipping at dollarshaveclub.com.
Welcome back to CBSN's continuing coverage of the inauguration of the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. And as we do see the parade continue to make its way past the viewing stand of President Trump and his family, it does belie the chaos that we did see break out here in the streets of Washington, D.C., and to a degree in other cities across the country. The demonstrations today at times turned violent as protesters lit fires and did damage to storefronts. They were repelled by D.C. Metro Police using tear gas and flashbang grenades, and certainly played out rather surreally this afternoon here in the nation's capital. We want to turn now to our Jamie Yukas, who's been covering the demonstrations near K Street and 13th. Jamie, what can you tell us about what you've seen and what you're seeing now?
Well, Josh, I want to go ahead and step out of the way because there is something happening right now. You can see this line of police officers. They've been here for the last half an hour or so after a car was lit on fire that had been damaged earlier in the day. There's been demonstrations that have popped up on and off throughout the day where they have become violent, but these police officers in their riot gear have tried to move people back. They're trying to really take over the streets once again and get some of these protesters to start moving themselves back, especially as we get towards nightfall. What happened earlier today is that there was a number of protesters up by DuPont Circle. There were a number down by the Capitol, and they were all trying to converge up on the street to walk up towards the White House. As they were coming up here, there was also a small group of anarchists who went ahead and smashed windows and did just damage to many different window fronts and cars in the area. We know that there was a news vehicle that was damaged, as well as a limousine where they had taken rocks and smashed the windows and then started that limousine on fire. That is really when things started to really heat up here this afternoon and that start to get violent. You saw these protesters start chucking rocks at the police officers in their riot gear, and that's when we, in the middle of everything, as they started chucking rocks at the police officers, that those flash grenades started going off and that tear gas was used to try to push the protesters back. We've now kind of been in a lull for the last little while here. As I said, these police officers have been standing here for about the last half an hour or so, and things have been relatively quiet, but that's almost a little unnerving because that's what's happened throughout the day today. You would have these pop-ups where there would be violence and then things would die down, and then we would see people go and pick up bricks along the street and start breaking places within the median and start taking trash and throwing it, knocking over trash cans, lighting them on fire. There was a number of times that my photographer and I also breathed in some of that tear gas that was used, and the moment as we were trying to get to safety ourselves, some of the protesters were using rocks and just throwing them wherever they could. I watched someone next to me have a rock hit them. So it's been one of those days where you really have to be alert. You have to know what's going on because it seems like even when we have these lulls like we do right now, that things could spring up at any point in time. And like I said, these officers have been standing here for a little while now, and hopefully we'll start pushing people back. The idea, though, is that as these balls start happening tonight, that there could be little pop-up protests that happen outside some of the inauguration balls. And of course, then tomorrow, one of the biggest demonstrations will happen here when the Women's March on Washington happens. There's supposed to be close to 1 million people here tomorrow. And if we see what we did yesterday, or today, rather, earlier today, is that so many demonstrators came here to peacefully protest, and these little anarchists, these groups kind of popped up and started taking over the message, really. When we talked to some of the protesters who had come here with their families, they were very frustrated by some of the violence that they saw and the damage that was being done.
All right, Jamie Yukis, thank you so much for that. Please stay safe. And as the inaugural parade continues, we are joined now by Hogan Gidley, a Republican strategist and CBSN political contributor, also the former communications director for Mike Huckabee, Tara Palmieri, a White House reporter for Politico, and Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Welcome to you all. So first, let's just get your thoughts, Hogan, on what we just heard from Jamie, this unrest here that seems to be popping up throughout the streets of D.C. We heard the tone of the president's speech. What do you make, first of all, of what we saw and what we heard from the president?
Well, first things first, I don't understand why protests turn violent. I've never been a fan of that. I don't get it. It takes the focus off of the cause you're trying to promote and puts focus on an illegality of some kind. You're damaging property. Now the cops have to step in. They're shooting tear gas at you. And so it doesn't become a story about what you're there to protest. It becomes ignorance or stupidity on the part of protesters themselves by doing things that are illegal. I have a serious problem with that. As far as the president is concerned, and his speech was fascinating to me because it struck the same populist tone he spoke about during the campaign itself. Countless nights we heard him say similar words up on the set in New York. And there was one particular graph that just blew my mind, and it was the one where he said it was a shot, the whole speech was a shot at both Republicans and Democrats, and it was the establishment protected itself. but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrate in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. That summed up his entire message, his entire theme, from the standpoint of people often blame Donald Trump for getting the country angry. The country was already angry. What he did was weaponize it into votes.
But you mentioned it. It's what we heard on a campaign. This is not a campaign stop. However, you can argue perhaps he delivered his first speech of his 2020 re-election campaign, and perhaps I'd like to talk to you about that. But this has been, historically, a place to let rhetoric soar, a place to look to heal partisan divides where they may exist. And to your point, they exist perhaps as acutely now as at any time in recent memory. Was there an opportunity or opportunities lost today?
I don't believe so for this reason. I think the time for talk in Washington is over. I think Republicans and Democrats are sick of the people up here pounding the podium, promising things that never get done. And what Donald Trump was pointing out, this wasn't a speech cloaked in the lofty verbiage of past speeches. It wasn't all about code words. It was direct and to the point. And you could see on his face, what I saw from his stoic appearance was, I'm ready to get to work. I'm ready to get to work right now because the American people deserve it. And I think it was a speech that was absolutely pointed at the folks out there who are hurting and have been hurting. The forgotten man, I think he called them in the speech. I thought it's not what we're used to from the political theater, and that's exactly what got him there. And so we wouldn't expect him to give us anything but what got him there when he gets there.
And then Tara, not 1 hour or two later, he was inside at a luncheon asking Hillary Clinton, whom his supporters had vocally asked to have locked up throughout the campaign proper, asking her to stand up, offering her a standing ovation, and saying he had a lot of respect for her and her husband. It would seem, if nothing else, an optically flexible president.
Exactly, and I think that his supporters, they're eventually going to need him to choose sides. At least right now in the beginning, they see Donald Trump in front of the stands. He's giving his grandiose, hard-hitting, angry Donald Trump that they love. But then behind the scenes, he's schmoozing. He's doing his businessman, patting everyone's back, saying, I respect you, I love you, Schumer, I used to give money to you. And that's not the guy that these people voted for. They voted for the populist Donald Trump. But who is he really? There are two sides of Donald Trump. And are the American people going to be okay with that? Because they're going to see both sides.
We do want to note, by the way, Tara's playing hurt. We do appreciate it.
Yes,
There's only so much that hot water with lemon can do, but we appreciate you being
Yes,
here.
absolutely. Well, Caitlin, let me ask you, because I was out there on the mall talking to folks who were out in front of the West Front, and they obviously were Trump supporters who felt like Donald Trump connected with them during that address. The forgotten people, as he said, they really felt as though their needs have been ignored. Their concerns have been ignored. They feel ignored. So this speech to them was very much a speech about hope, whereas other people may have seen the typical unconventional campaign style, and perhaps it may have been jarring to some. What they heard and the message they received seemed to be quite different. And so I guess what I'm wondering is that enough for a president going forward now? We've seen his approval ratings. We've seen going into office. What does that mean for his political capital to try and accomplish some of these legislative ideas?
Well, I think that's the question, at least for the next several months, whether or not this is actually going to work. I asked a lot of his supporters out on the mall today, what do you make of the approval ratings? What do you make of the fact that he is coming in at 42%? And they said, that's the media talking. Those are fake polls. Those same people predicted that he wouldn't be here, and look where he is taking the oath. I also asked, what kind of approach do you want him to take to this office? And I heard from a couple of people the same exact thing he's been doing. I think he's going to stick up for himself and stick up for us. I'm paraphrasing here, but that was generally the assessment. But we are going to see whether or not this will work. And as we have talked about so many times, campaigning is different from governing, but particularly in this Congress. Donald Trump has a 52 majority Republicans. But he's going to be building these odd kinds of coalitions to get some of these things done. Why the approval rating, I think, matters is because he has an established goodwill with Democrats that I think would be very willing to work with him on certain issues, particularly those Democrats from places like Michigan, Ohio, places that he won and that voters there were sending similar messages. So it's going to be really interesting to watch whether or not he can defy political gravity again as president, as he did on the campaign trail.
I want to make one point to that. The beauty of the Trump movement, I believe, is that it's results-oriented. So he can't get there and not accomplish the things he promised he would do. He's got to bring it. He's got to get these things done. And Republicans can't hide behind Reid, and they can't hide behind Pelosi, and they can't hide behind Obama. Now we run the show, okay? We caught the car. Are we going to sit there and bark at the tires, or are we going to get in and drive it? You know what I mean? And so for me, most Americans, and the ones I spoke to out there, I heard the same thing. He's speaking for us, to us. I was a Democrat. I voted for him because I want some results. I'm sick and tired of the talking around it. And while the people here think the economy's great, go to the layaway account at Walmart at Christmas. It's not great. People are not feeling the quote-unquote recovery. We all know it's anemic. But they don't feel what they're told is happening because they're living something much different. And that's what he spoke to today.
Well, to that point, too, if I can add, the city today is certainly a tale of two cities, right? We saw that, we've seen that before, but certainly with the protests, I walked outside of the Capitol grounds on my way over here to the other side, and you pass through these protests, and so you saw the celebration next to the Capitol and in the grounds, and then you walk over and see. I mean, this is really, I think, painting the picture of what this administration is heading into, how divided the country really is.
Tara, I was struck, too, as I was out talking to folks in the crowd today about how there's a sense of distrust when it comes to, we talked about poll numbers, because several people brought that up to me, unsolicited, saying, this notion of polls and the news that you're trying to put out about Donald Trump, we don't believe it. We don't necessarily trust in what it is that you have to say because the polls got it wrong. You all never expected him to win, and look what he's done. What do you think that could potentially mean going forward here for the White House and its relationship with the media? As we've already heard, there have been discussions about moving not just the briefing room perhaps out of the White House itself, but even the workspaces of those press members who cover the White House day in and day out.
I think Donald Trump has made it very clear that he doesn't think he needs the press. He thinks he's above the polls, and he's going to shoot from the hip and make decisions from his gut, and he's not going to follow what public opinion says. Although he is very, very sensitive at the same time. He does read the New York Times every day. He reads the blogs. He gets printouts of what people say on television like us. But at the same time, he thinks he goes with his gut, shoots from the hip, and he's going to create an adversary of anyone who is on the same team as him. And he's going to vilify them. He'll vilify them in public, but like you saw today at that lunch, he'll shake their hand and pat them on the back and say they're great people. Did that with the press. I mean, I was at his off-the-record press briefing in Mar-a-Lago, and he was very gracious. I was shocked. I mean, it was one of my first times as a pool reporter after coming back from Europe covering Brexit, and I was just shocked by how he made the press. He would point to the press at rallies and say, those guys are bad people, and have people boo at them and shout at them and throw things. And then when we were with him, oh, you're great, you're helping me with vetting, you're this, you're that. It was shocking.
He's basically said, if it's been said of him, nobody reads a room quite like him, and it certainly doesn't matter, I suppose, what room it is that he's reading. But he's also, again, he's a president who tweeted out Happy New Year and then invoked his enemies list. So,
well, he had low approval ratings to begin with. Neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump would have had high approval ratings once they were sworn in. But let's think about this, too. He's been a very active president-elect, not just with tweets, but with pushing the hand of Boeing, with the carrier deal, with Ford, all these types of calling out Congressman Lewis. I mean, he's doing things that most people don't. Absolutely, very effectively.
Twitter pulpit, and able to really harness it because people are scared of him. Companies are scared of him.
That's right. As you can all tell, we have much to get to with our panel. We're going to ask Hogan, Tara, and Caitlin to stand by as we thank you. As our inauguration coverage does continue, we're going to step away, take a quick break. In roughly an hour's time, meanwhile, the Liberty Ball is set to begin, and our Rena Ninan is inside. We'll be chatting with her and her guests when we return. Stay with us. Still lots to get to on this day of history here in the nation's capital. You're watching CBSN.
Just confirm Mattis.
The inauguration of America's 45th president, Donald Trump. Stay with CBSN for complete coverage streaming on your favorite device. CBSN, always on.
Blades, 11.5 moisture strips. It's the best shave that will ever be possible.
Didn't you guys say that about the last one?
No, that one only had 11 moisture strips. Primitive. And next-gen breakthroughs, like this laser chin detection system, don't come cheap. Let me look into financing options for you.
Hey, man, you don't need to pay for all that to get a great shave when you can ride up on this for just a few bucks.
Try our best razor for $1 with free shipping at DollarShaveClub.com.
When we power local with Westar and KCP&L, we keep local jobs right here in Kansas. We're supporting our friends and neighbors and our local economy. When we power local with Westar and KCP&L, we help keep costs down and rates affordable while maintaining our strong commitment to our communities. And that's something we can't afford to lose. Go to kcpl.com/Westar today and learn how you can show your support for keeping power local.
The inauguration of America's 45th president, Donald Trump. Stay with CBSN for complete coverage streaming on your favorite device. CBSN, always on.
They just cleared this area a few days ago. They say the entire thing is mine.
The police here are trying to stop us. This is what it's like covering a story here in China.
More than 100 businesses and homes were destroyed. Just take a look at this. It was once an apartment building.
There are ways out of rebel hell, the Aleppo. One of them is right through this gap. But every journey like that is a dangerous gamble.
CBSN are continuing coverage of the presidential inauguration. And as the inaugural parade continues, we want to check in right now with our Jan Crawford, who's been on the parade route all day. Jan?
Well, we're right now, I'd say about 100 yards, 150 yards from the reviewing stand where the president, the first lady, and the first family are watching the assorted bands as they march by. It's quite a festive scene. In fact, we had a big brigade of tractors a while ago. So, it's been a kind of an exciting day when you see all the supporters coming out for President Trump, but also an interesting one because as we started this parade route, and of course it started up on Capitol Hill after he had the luncheon with members of Congress, when it started rolling down the streets, you could see crowds of people gathered there, all very excited. They got their cell phones out and little flags waving, but there were protesters mixed in with many of those crowds, and in fact one block, I would say about half a block, was all protesters with signs and booing, very, very strongly anti-Trump. Now, where we were in the parade was about 50 feet in front of the president's vehicle, so it was just like the best seat, obviously, to watch the parade because you could see what he was seeing and the reaction of the crowd as he would get close and approach the crowd. He did get out at 2 different points during the parade, right across from the Justice Department, between the Justice Department and FBI, walked a little bit down Pennsylvania Avenue with the First Lady, and then once he got here to this kind of plaza, this part of Pennsylvania Avenue is now closed off to automobile traffic. He got out again and walked just a little short way as he made his way back to the reviewing stand.
Couldn't help but notice, Jan, in fact, that first time he got out of the car and walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, he did decide to stop and idle in front of a new D.C. hotel, I believe, owned by one Donald J. Trump and the Trump organization. It was hard to miss.
Josh, that was a very interesting choice, where that kind of exit point, right? Because, right there by the Justice Department and then the Trump Hotel right up ahead. But also what was gathered there was a big group of protesters standing against the barricades, carrying posters and signs. I mean, it appeared to be a very organized protest. It's certainly the largest group of protesters. So Trump or the Secret Service, someone made the decision that he was going to get back into that vehicle before he got to that large group of protesters. And so we saw him walk a little bit, and there were, throngs of people, and the crowds were positive. He got back into the car before he got to the hotel where most of the protesters had kind of set up camp.
And Jan, quickly, the split screens, for those watching on televisions this afternoon, were striking, because on one half of the screen was this parade rolling out, perhaps intermittently disturbed by protesters, but on the other half of so many who were watching today were these violent protests, these demonstrations that had turned riotous. On the other streets here in the nation's capital, was there an awareness along that parade route that those other demonstrations, which had really turned into riots, were in fact happening?
No, I don't think so, unless people were actually, and everybody has a cell phone now, so if people were following along on Twitter or getting news alerts, then they would have known. But there was really no sense at most points in the parade that there were even significant protests at all. I mean, there was a very strong security presence on this parade. There were two of these I don't know if you can see this metal barricade behind me, but there were 2 of those, and the crowds were then behind that. Police officers were lined facing the crowds, and then the Secret Service was actually ushering all the participants around the motorcade. Very high police presence. Now, near the Trump Hotel, where that large group of protesters that I was talking about was, just north of there was where some of the major protests were occurring. And our colleague Anna Warner was reporting earlier during that parade that you could actually hear some of those protests from far away. But from the parade itself, it was festive. There were marching bands, cheering crowds, babies on daddy's heads, waving little flags. It was kind of a classic parade for the most part, except for, I say, kind of like those pockets of protesters. But you didn't hear the violence that we saw in those pictures and the images, which was, as you said, an extraordinary contrast.
Jan Crawford there again along the parade route. Jen, we will be back with you, and we do thank you. We do have some news breaking just now. There is now a second member of Donald Trump's cabinet.
Yes, we know James Mattis confirmed as Defense Secretary. We know as well that we are expecting on Monday the confirmation vote for Mike Pompeo for CIA Director. And so all of this happening, of course, against the backdrop of the inaugural events that are continuing right now.
Indeed, as retired General John Kelly has also been so confirmed by the Senate. He is going to lead the Department of Homeland Security. So again, we'll be keeping our eyes on the goings-on of the business of the government as these inauguration events do continue well into the night for the 45th president. He is scheduled to attend, in fact, 3 official inaugural balls this evening as we drop into Washington, D.C. proper. First stop will be at the Liberty Ball that is held at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center.
Then he will stay in the convention center to attend the Freedom Ball before heading to the National Building Museum for the final event of the night, the Armed Services Ball. Our Rena Ninan is at the Freedom Ball with more. Good evening, Rena.
Hi, good evening, guys. I'm still waiting for that bar to open up and a cocktail to be handed to me. That the crew is telling me that it's not available at this hour. But as you mentioned, there will be 3 balls tonight. You know, when President Obama first took office, he attended 10 different balls. And the second go-round, he decided 2 would be enough. And tonight, President Donald Trump will attend 3. This won't be his second one that he attends. And you know, the first inaugural ball in D.C. actually started back in 1809 under James Madison. People paid $4 a pop. About 400 people showed up. And this was the idea that was born, that people who were well-heeled and big-time fundraisers would have a chance to celebrate the win of their candidate. And joining me here at the ball, not alone, hopefully with a cocktail in hand shortly, are Leslie Sanchez and Steve Shigaris. Thank you guys for joining us. Leslie, you've attended many Republican balls before. How does the mood of this inauguration of this ball feel to you compared to others?
You know, it's interesting. You talked about the price tag, and the price tag for some of these balls was $50. It was very
for this one.
Yes, yeah. For this one particularly, and there are going to be 25,000 people here. The difference with that, as you talked about, it was the highbrow, the special interest, the lobbyists, the affluent who could afford it. This was really something where people could get their families. You saw a lot of children, like other inaugurations, come and get excited about feeling like they're taking over the country again. That was the theme of the day, is that I'm really speaking to you. It certainly compares to Barack Obama, but the tone and the message really portrayed extremely well. That's why you see so much excitement for people coming today.
Steve, I'm curious, one of the last ball that he will attend will be with military families and folks in the military community. I'm thinking about those nearly 2 million reservists, men and women in the armed forces, who will now have a new defense secretary. We've just heard about that. How can you compare, when you're looking at previous administrations, how these confirmation hearings have happened and getting people through?
Well, so we have now 2, Mattis and the DHS Secretary Kelly have been confirmed. That's 2 on Inauguration Day. It's actually a slower pace than we saw with Barack Obama's first term. And, you know, you hear Republicans complaining about the slow pace. They're blaming Democrats in the Senate for slowing things down. They wanted to have as many as 7, as many as Barack Obama did on his first day, confirmed. Republicans, who were in the minority in 2009, worked with Democrats to get 7 confirmed. They feel that was only fair. Democrats have a lot of questions about this cabinet. They're slowing things down a little bit. In fact, the Republicans wanted to have CIA director nominee Pompeo confirmed today, and that's being delayed until Monday. What's interesting is the Democrats are saying we've never had a CIA director confirmed by Inauguration Day, and that's true. That has not happened in the history of the CIA director. So, you know, it's not a huge disaster for the Trump administration not to have these people in place, but they want to get going from the very beginning, and they now only have 2 of their cabinet members in place right now.
Leslie, when you talk about the cabinet members, so much of Donald Trump's mission and his campaign was about draining the swamp.
Yeah.
Is he going to make good on that?
I definitely think so. Talking to a lot of folks that I know that are very close to the new administration, they wanted to make a clarification. When they say draining the swamp, they are talking particularly about special interest. I said, it's just establishment Republicans. They mean the chambers of commerce. They mean these associations that have really been the lobbying entity that take in coffers of cash, big PACs, and have the influence in the White House. He wants to change that. He wants to make the party, the Republican National Committee, for example, be more influential, and also the people directly related to the context that they have, and not go through third parties. So it's going to be a very, I think there's going to be some resistance to that unraveling.
But I think there's going to be some stuff to watch there as well, because a lot of his critics say, first of all, there could be potential conflicts of interest with Donald Trump and his businesses, right? And even though he's not supposedly running his businesses anymore, there are going to be a lot of questions raised about that. How is that different if he's enriching himself through this office? We talked to Corey Lewandowski on a new podcast, if I may plug it for a minute. Major Garrett has a new podcast called The Takeout. We talked to Corey Lewandowski yesterday about this. He just opened a lobbying shop 1 block away from the White House. This is Trump's former campaign manager. And I asked him directly, how is this not draining the swamp.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, how is this? It goes against that idea. It's a guy who worked for the campaign. Now he's opening up shop 1 block away from the White House to basically sell access to the president and to a Republican Congress. And, you know, he says he's working on issues that are important to everybody, and it's not in the vein of a swamp. This is about other issues. And so we have to give them some time, but
I want to ask you,
Leslie,
I want to ask you, Gayle King had an interview with Eric Trump, and he said just how working his father is. 7 days a week. He's a businessman who's used to getting things done and getting things done quickly. That's not always the MO when you've got to deal with Congress. How is he going to bridge this divide?
It's definitely going to be a learning curve. We've seen it for the last 2 presidents, going back 3 presidents. You certainly saw it even with Bill Clinton the first 2 years, and then the Republican takeover of the House. He put in a change of it. It's always executive management. That's where the first shakeup usually is. It's somebody who's moving the process to be effective with Capitol Hill. So as much as resistance as you want, there is a hand-in-hand relationship working with Congress, even if it's a majority, to get these measures through. And that's going to be really a learning curve and something about finesse that's going to be extremely important.
Okay, we're going to have to unfortunately leave it there, but we'll hope to see you guys back. I'm going to send it back to you, Elaine and Josh.
All right, Rena, thanks so much. We now want to just let you listen to the sights and sounds of the inaugural parade.
Our next performance group hails from Naples, Florida. The Palmetto Ridge High School Band is the first Collier County marching band to perform in the presidential inaugural parade. They were able to raise over $135,000 with the help of the Friends at Fox News by collecting donations throughout the community and their website. The Palmetto Ridge Marching Pride of Naples, Florida. Flags as they were admitted to the Union. Representing Kansas, West Virginia, Nevada, Nebraska, Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington State, Idaho, and Wyoming. Once again, the Boy Scouts of America National Capital Area Council and their great flag bearers participating today.
Coast Guard is the staff element, followed by the United States Coast Guard Band. And policy. Also is the United States Coast Guard. U.S. Coast Guard Active Duty Company represents the 42,000 Coast Guard active duty members. Leading the United States Coast Guard Active Duty Company is Commander Joseph Muse. Also is the United States Coast Guard Reserve. The Reserve component is represented by members of Coast Guard headquarters. There are 3,860 military, civilian, and contractor men and women who do work at headquarters every day to support the execution of all 11 of Coast Guard's statutory missions. Following them is the United States Coast Guard Color Guard, coming from Alexandria, Virginia, and carrying the national ensign and Coast Guard standards are the United States Coast Guard Ceremonial Honor Guard.
Ladies and gentlemen, those beautiful horses are from the Cleveland Police Mounted Units from Cleveland, Ohio, one of the oldest continuous mounted units in America. Their first inaugural parade was in 1921 for President Harding's inauguration. And we welcome the North Carolina Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association. From Hillsborough, North Carolina, wearing flight suits from the Vietnam War era. By the way, this unit's costs have been paid by parade participants. This is the third presidential inaugural parade this unit has participated in, and all members were helicopter pilots in the Vietnam conflict, with a combined excess of 20,000 combat flying hours. As these Vietnam helicopter pilots pass, let's hear it one more time for these true American heroes.
All right, a look at the sights and sounds of the inaugural parade.
Being really enjoyed
I was going to say,
by President Trump.
Very enthusiastic Commander-in-Chief.
This is as enthusiastic, I believe, as we've seen him.
A hearty round of applause.
Having seen this now and listening to Jan's report, I'm a proud member of the Southeastern Conference. So is Jan. We have people on set here from LSU. I saw a lot of Auburn hats today.
Yeah.
The booing was not for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
It was for Tennessee, the band playing Rocket Top. That's what the problem was.
Exactly.
All right.
I'm on the record for that.
Actually, the problem might have been Clemson, but that's a story for a different time.
All right, gentlemen. Moving on here. Markets around the world are reacting today to the inauguration of President Donald Trump. Mr. Trump is considered a pro-business commander-in-chief who today preached America first.
And so here in the United States, as you can see here, stocks were up across the board at closing after actually a 5-day losing streak. We do want to welcome Danny Berger now. She's a reporter for Bloomberg News, and she is joining us from New York. So, Danny, if nothing else, it would appear the markets approved of what they saw in the nation's capital.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? This is why I love the markets, because we can get an instant reaction to how they're feeling. So one thing that I would point out today, even though we did end up, it was a very slight gain, about 0.2%. But during Trump's speech, we actually saw a sharp decline in the stock market. So remember, this is his inaugural address, gave more of a populist tone. And populism, if you look at other leaders who have preached the same sort of message, it hasn't been well for the economy, for the markets, essentially modern day markets are built to be a global trading environment. So when you get to sort of that America first rhetoric, I think it spooked a couple people out there. And we did see a sell-off, however, we did improve by the end of the day.
And what about foreign markets in Europe and Asia?
Absolutely. Well, we certainly saw the peso react today. I mean, but really it's interesting because leaders both here in the U.S. and abroad, economic leaders, they're still waiting it out a bit. So there's the Davos concert today, which is the World Economic Forum. You had JP Morgan there, leaders from major businesses. Really interesting to hear them say, you know what, don't listen to these one-liners that Trump is saying. Look at his cabinet. We have a very pro-business cabinet. We have people like Wilbur Ross, billionaires within his cabinet, that they're going to be very friendly. But I will say some of the sectors in the economy, such as healthcare, which he's had that strong populist message of reducing prices, we actually have seen those stocks drop recently.
All right, Danny Berger in New York for us. Danny, thank you so much. As the inaugural parade continues, we are joined right now by Hogan Gidley, a Republican strategist and CBSN political contributor, also the former communications director for Mike Huckabee, CBS News Justice reporter Paula Reed, and Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico. All right, a lot to get to. Paula, when I was out on the mall talking to Trump supporters, one man looked me in the eye and said the thing that mattered most to him was a Supreme Court pick. So tell us, what is the thing here that people are going to be looking at for clues? Do we have signals already? And how significant is this pick?
Well, that voter, he was not alone. 20% of voters said the Supreme Court was the most important factor in deciding who to vote for, and Trump got a majority of those voters. So they're going to be looking for someone who believes what they believe. They're going to be looking for a conservative pick. But the big question is, what kind of conservative will Trump pick? He had that initial list that he released of 21. We've whittled it down to just a handful now.
Including a couple that were rather surprised to be on that original list.
Yes. Several of them were quite surprised, but perhaps honored, no less. But we've whittled it down to about 3 or 4 names that just keep popping up. That includes William Pryor. He is an appeals court judge who's appointed by George W. Bush. He is an abortion opponent. That's something a lot of these people are going to be looking at. He called it an abomination. But his stance on abortion could also make it difficult for him to get votes from Democrats. He's obviously going to get a lot of opposition from maybe even moderate Republicans. But what's interesting is he also has a decision where he sided with a transgender woman down in Georgia. So he was pro-transgender rights. That could perhaps upset some conservatives, but he only joined that opinion. He didn't actually write it. Neil Gorsuch and Dianne Sykes have also been, their names have also been floated. Similar profiles, appellate judges nominated by George W. Bush, but perhaps less apt to cause the controversy that Pryor might.
Interestingly, we did see, this has been a seat that has been there to fill since the death of Justice Scalia. It has been open for some time now. The nomination by President Obama of Merrick Garland was hung up in the Senate, saying we were not going to go through a confirmation hearing. We were going to let the new president decide. At that point, many people thought perhaps that new president would be Hillary Clinton. But here we are now. Do you see, is there a sense that there might be, though, some retribution on the part of Democrats frustrated that Merrick Garland never got his hearing?
Oh, absolutely. They're absolutely upset about the fact that their president didn't even get a chance to nominate in his last seat. But what's really interesting is it's rare that you get a pick on your first day in office. You already have an open seat. But Trump could potentially get 2, maybe even 3 of 2 justices who are in their 80s. And those justices are Ginsburg, a reliable liberal vote, and also Kennedy, the swing vote. If Trump is able to replace either one of those justices with a reliable conservative, there will absolutely be a fight, maybe a bloodbath on the Hill, because that will potentially change the court and the course of American law for potentially decades to come.
Lots of stuff to unpack there. I do, though, want to bring you in here, Jake. As it regards the inaugural address that we heard today, in fact, our Nancy Cordes reported that afterward, in speaking to some Democratic lawmakers who were sitting just behind the president as he delivered it, that they were shell-shocked by what they heard. People have said that it, for all the world, appears though he declared war, an open war on Congress today. What are lawmakers telling you?
I think what we need to keep in mind here is that this is the same thing he's been saying for the last 2 years, and 60 million people, or however many million people voted for him, liked it. This was not a surprise. This was not a departure. This is why Donald Trump was elected. So I think if people are shell-shocked, then they're probably in denial or not paying attention to 2 years of campaigning. And the funny thing to me is I was in the lunch afterwards, the inaugural lunch that President Trump had with members of Congress, many members of Congress, top people in leadership, and it was basically a repudiation of what he had said before. It's the backslapping, elbow-grabbing, wine-drinking members of Congress who he was talking to and hanging out with, and they were sucking up to him. So I think that Donald Trump has never been in Washington before. He doesn't understand how the town works. If you remember, Barack Obama also said he was going to change Washington, something he never was able to do. Donald Trump's not going to change Washington. Things have been going on a certain way for 250 years, and they're going to keep going on that way.
So, Jake, how much political capital, realistically then, after an inaugural address like that, after sometimes very pointed tweets, members of the establishment, I heard from someone on the Mall who said when Paul Ryan was up there in a video that was playing, that he couldn't stand to even look at Paul Ryan, that this was a Trump supporter who felt as though Paul Ryan and others who were part of the Republican establishment were part of the problem. So the question is, for this president who has made it a point to disagree very publicly and pointedly in places where people may not necessarily be expecting him to, although, as you point out, this has been consistent on his part. What is his actual political capital going to be moving forward?
With Republicans, it's going to be high. With 98% of Republicans, he's going to have a lot of political capital. The one thing I would watch is if he takes a lot of executive actions and does a lot of things to kind of poke Democrats in the eye, whether he believes in it or not, that will eat away at his political capital on things like a huge infrastructure bill. He said he's talked about it in his address. He wants to build highways, roads, airports. He's going to need Democrats. $1 trillion of government spending on infrastructure is not something almost any Republican is going to be interested in. So if I were Donald Trump, I would not take a lot of action on immigration or health care. I would kind of keep your powder dry for a little bit.
Interestingly, Hogan, it's not just that he's going to need those lawmakers. Yeah. He's going to need those votes, those 77,000 some odd votes that, when you boil it all down, gave him the 45th presidency. He's going to need the jobs that an infrastructure bill would provide. Is another way of looking at what we heard from the president today. Is it fair to say this was the first speech delivered in his 2020 reelection campaign?
I don't know about that. I think it was more a blueprint of what he wanted to do and what he wanted to accomplish and what he promised he would accomplish when he took office. Jake's absolutely right. No one should be surprised. Although it was after every single primary victory, we kept hearing, I'm going to pivot, I'm going to be so presidential, you're not even going to know it. And now we kept seeing the same rhetoric, and we saw it again today. But look, I don't necessarily know or believe political capital is going to matter immediately. I feel like using another football analogy, I don't know if it's all the bands I'm hearing that's making me think of football, but sometimes you run to set up the pass, and sometimes you pass to set up the run. And if he starts racking up results and people start liking him, that's going to translate into some power and clout with folks over there at the Hill who don't like him. I don't know that he's going to need political capital up front because he doesn't have any. So he can't use that capital. So the only thing I think he can do is to begin to make good on some of those campaign promises. And remember, the war he basically called for today was not a war on Democrats. It was a war on Republicans, Democrats, the establishment. People are fed up with the establishment. We've talked about this before. It doesn't matter who's in charge, Republicans or Democrats. This town never changes. That's why they wanted someone different. So I think he has the opportunity to rack up some early victories. He absolutely has to do something about health care. He absolutely has to do something about immigration because those were the cornerstones of his plan. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to start building a wall tomorrow, but he's got to figure out how to do that pretty quickly because those are the things that got him in office. And as I said, the movement's results-oriented. Without results, he's not going to be reelected in 2020.
As we do keep an eye here on our screen, you see Vice President Mike Pence, they're talking to the new defense secretary, that is retired General James Mattis, as we also see that the Trumps, led by President Donald Trump, are now leaving the viewing stand, having taken in the sights and sounds of this inaugural parade.
There you see as well Barron, not far behind, just a few steps behind. It's been interesting to watch him as well. Obviously, the glare of that spotlight is unlike anything else. To be in the White House, and particularly to be a child growing up in the White House, that will be something undoubtedly there will be much attention on in the years ahead. But as we continue to watch the President and the First Lady, the first family now, leaving that area. Certainly at this moment, many people who have come here to see him, folks that I spoke with, are looking to him with great expectations, promises that they expect him to deliver on, many hopes riding on his presidency.
And as we wonder then who it might be that he will look to, a team of advisors, certainly flanked by members there of his own family. We know that, as described by his adult children, it's an insular family, and perhaps he'll turn to them. But Jake, he will also certainly be turning to, by most any measure, a vice president who stands to be perhaps the most powerful vice president, certainly in recent memory, and somebody I know that you covered and have for many years.
Yeah, Mike Pence knows Congress. And today at the lunch, Roy Blunt, the senator from Missouri, reminded Donald Trump that the center of Washington, geographically, is the Capitol, not the White House. And that's something that Donald Trump is going to have to get used to, because there's 535 former class presidents on Capitol Hill who don't like to cede any power to anybody else ever. So Mike Pence has the most important thing in this White House, which is relationships on Capitol Hill that go back many years. He was on the Hill for a long time. He is close friends with Paul Ryan. He's been in the wars of the conservative movement for more than a decade. And if you think that Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, and Stephen Bannon, one of his senior advisors who ran Breitbart, these are not people who know how the government works. They might be smart people. They might be smart in business. Mike Pence understands government and understands what it takes to get an idea to a bill to law.
Well, we also know, as Hogan was saying, there's got to be something done about health care. Donald Trump has said and has continued to say that he expects the repeal and replacement to happen essentially simultaneously. When he said it, that was certainly news to many GOP lawmakers, including Speaker Ryan. What sort of conduit, then, will the vice president be between a reluctant, if shell-shocked, Congress and a president who wants to get to work?
I think the Trump team realizes more than they're letting on publicly, and they say this privately, that it takes a long time to get things done. And I don't think they expect to get health care done in the first month, 2, 3, 4, even 5 months. I think they realize this is going to be a long process. This is going to take time. And I think Mike Pence is somebody that knows where the pressure points are, knows who to go to when you need to close loophole A, or you need to plug this leak, or you need to, keep the boat from sinking. And that's something that is going to be invaluable to a man who doesn't know anybody in Congress, really, Donald Trump, except the people that campaign for him.
And one other thing about Vice President Pence, and it's this: not only does he know this town, he's also a governor. So he knows how to govern things. He knows how to shepherd things through. In addition, he can't hide behind a podium at the helm of a state like he can in D.C. He understands how to get things started, how to work with the other side at both levels. He understands how mandates from this city go out and permeate through the states as well. He is going to be an invaluable partner for Donald Trump in this, and you hit on it, and it's a word that will ultimately determine, I think, success or failure in this, and it's relationships. Vice President Pence has them. He's going to use them, hopefully, for the accomplishments of Donald Trump's agenda.
Paula, I want to ask you about another topic. You cover the Justice Department day in and day out, and I'm wondering how the folks there are feeling about the incoming administration, because when I talk to folks, I keep going back to this morning. I spent a lot of time out on the mall this morning. But one of the things that was raised to me is that there is a sense of lawlessness among some Trump supporters that is very strong and visceral. It is a feeling for them that things are out of control. And they feel very strongly that Donald Trump, under his leadership, will restore, as he said on the campaign trail time and time again, law and order.
Right.
How are folks in the Justice Department feeling right now?
In the Justice Department for the past 8 years, there's been such a focus on civil rights. Of course, they do the bread and butter work. They do the criminal, the antitrust, the national security. But civil rights has really been the defining issue for Holder and for Loretta Lynch. There is an understanding that there's going to be big change in that department, but there's mixed feelings on whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing. Some people say, yes, they've gone too far. They've been too hard on police. Police have been demonized, and every day they put their lives on the line. But there are other people, even some police officers, who will say, if the Department of Justice hadn't come and opened this investigation, we wouldn't have gotten the resources and the training that we've been asking the local counsel for a long time. So most people in the Department of Justice see the big change is going to be in civil rights. Some people think it's good, some people not so good. As we then wait for the Inspector General's report as to the FBI's and specifically FBI Director James Comey's handling of a Hillary Clinton email scandal that obviously touched every part of the campaign and certainly the election itself. What then do we think the future is at the FBI? This report is expected to come out in about a year, and it will look at several aspects of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. First of all, it will look at that infamous letter that Comey sent to Congress. There were 2 letters, so look at both of them. It's going to take a really close look at some of the personnel that were staffed on this investigation. They're basically going to relitigate the entire investigation, which has already been so painful for the FBI and the Department of Justice. A report will be released at the end of the year. No one expects criminal wrongdoing. But people do expect that the FBI director's job is on the line whenever this report comes out. We all know that based on what's happened, there will be enough information in that report that the president could, if he wanted to, fire the FBI director. He has a 10-year term. He was appointed in 2003. He should have several more years ahead of him. But when that report comes out, Donald Trump will have the ability and the ammo to fire him if he so chooses. Who are you hearing if Comey's out? Giuliani is a name that has been floated. I do not speak with the Trump campaign. That is coming from inside the Department of Justice. You know, those sort of parlor game when people float names. But that is a name that people have floated inside the Department of Justice. I have not heard any other names inside DOJ, but the Trump campaign may have other ideas. It's been pointed out that the former mayor of New York does have very good relationships with the New York office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and to some seem to see the letter that came late in the election, a bit before everybody else. Perhaps just coincidence. Hogan, Jake, Paula, thank you so much. Of course, you're all sticking around, so it's a relative thank you. Our inauguration coverage does continue then here. We're going to step away, take a quick break, and we will be checking back in with our Rena Ninen. She is standing by with Leslie and Steve at the Freedom Ball.
But first, here's a look at the Inauguration Day moments that captivated social media.
Blades, 11.5 moisture strips. It's the best shave that will ever be possible.
Didn't you guys say that about the last one?
No, that one only had 11 moisture strips. Primitive. And next-gen breakthroughs, like this laser chin detection system, don't come cheap. Let me look into financing options for you.
Hey, man, you don't need to pay for all that to get a great shave when you can ride up on this for just a few bucks.
Try our best razor for $1 with free shipping at DollarShaveClub.com.
When we power local with Westar and KCP&L, we keep local jobs right here in Kansas. We're supporting our friends and neighbors and our local economy. When we power local with Westar and KCP&L, we help keep costs down and rates affordable while maintaining our strong commitment to our communities. And that's something we can't afford to lose. Go to kcpl.com/Westar today and learn how you can show your support for keeping power local.
They just cleared this area a few days ago. They say the entire thing is mine.
The police here are trying to stop us. This is what it's like covering a story here in China.
More than 100 businesses and homes were destroyed. Just take a look at this. It was once an apartment building.
There are ways out of rebel hell, the Aleppo. One of them is right through this gap, but every journey like that is a dangerous gamble.
A live look at the White House as our coverage here of Inauguration Day continues. A look at the new home of President Donald Trump. He is soon going to depart the White House to attend inaugural balls, and this is a live shot of the Liberty Ball.
Irina Ninen is, in fact, though, at the Freedom Ball, where the president will also soon be appearing. And just to make sure everybody's completely confused, Liberty and Freedom Balls respectively happening essentially in the same place. Thankfully, Rena Ninen on hand for it all. Hey, Rena.
I certainly am. I can explain that one, Josh. We're here at the D.C. Convention Center, and that's why you have multiple areas with different types of balls. They are expecting Donald Trump. He hasn't left the White House, as you guys mentioned, but lots of folks already wearing glitz and glamour and ready to salute the new commander-in-chief, and this will be the second ball that he'll attend tonight. And joining me, Leslie Sanchez, Republican contributor, and our Steve Shigaris from our Washington bureau as well. Okay, I want to ask you guys, we've seen sort of the mood kick up here a bit. So many of these folks are donors, people who helped bring him into the White House, but you have this significant part of America who in the Rust Belt state probably couldn't be more far removed from this type of situation. How is he going to juxtapose this with folks in New York, corporate folks that he has great business ties with, and staying true to his promise to folks in the Rust Belt states, better jobs?
Well, it's interesting. You heard his speech today, and I think he was really talking to those folks and not to the Wall Street types, not to the people who critics have said he has filled his cabinet and his administration with, and the people that have helped him get here. Although, you know, there's something to be said that Donald Trump spent a lot of his own money to get here as well. So he claims that he's not indebted to the rich people. He's in this for all of America, all Americans. And really, you heard him again speaking today to those people who supported him, who wanted to see somebody come into this country, into this town, and shake things up. Really, I mean, if you look at the polling, we talked about this earlier, you look at the polling all the way through the primaries and through the general election, that's one theme that stuck with voters, which is they want somebody to come in and change how Washington works. And those people who said that in all of those polls voted for Trump mostly. So that's what he's going to do. We'll see if he can actually keep those promises.
Leslie, he said that every day next week he's going to have something new to put forward. What do you think about that?
I think we need to all be on our toes because this is going to start from day one. Most new presidents have an ambitious agenda. They start that first 100 days. They want to, in some cases, roll back some regulatory aspects, and others move forward with a big sweeping agenda item that's really going to be the hallmark of their term. This is a case where immediately on the agenda you're hearing about rolling back many of these executive orders that President Obama had. And particularly, I think, talking to Steve's point, there were a lot of common areas. They felt the regulation was too high. They felt that a border wall needed, the border, especially the southern border, needed to be secure. They felt that the premiums and everything going wrong with the Affordable Care Act needed to be remedied immediately. So that's really the target area that fundamentally we're all going to be watching.
I think you'll see tax reform. There's no question that there's agreement within the Republican Party, Republican Congress, and Trump on that. And then, of course, Supreme Court. There's still a vacancy.
And he's promised within the first
couple of weeks we're going to see that too. So it's going to be a very busy first 100 days. We talk about the first 100 days. I think one thing we have to keep in mind here is, Trump comes into office with a 32% approval rating, and I think Republicans are acutely aware of that.
How does that compare?
Very low. It's the lowest.
But when
it's
you
the
talk
lowest.
to other Republicans, it's the lowest.
It's the lowest. So it's 32% in the CBS News poll. Since CBS News has been polling in 1981 on this question, it's the lowest of any incoming president. So Republicans see that, and you don't see it publicly, but the undercurrent here is a teetering, right? If Donald Trump overreaches, doesn't succeed early on, keep in mind there's a midterm election coming up in 2018. Democrats are going to do whatever they can to try to get the majority in the Senate and in the House, and it's going to be a tough fight. And the closer you get to an election, I think the more people are thrown under the bus when things aren't going so well, right? And so you're going to see Republicans, if things aren't going very well this year, if Trump starts to stumble or doesn't succeed very quickly, I think you might start seeing
Leslie,
some Republicans peel off.
When he says he has a mandate, is he correct?
That's very true. A lot of people feel that way. The one thing about having such a low approval rating is going to go up. I mean, the chances of it going down are very low. He's got, I'm an optimist. I mean, I definitely feel that as he starts moving forward with some of these big items that on the mandate that he spent time talking about, and he won't change his message. I think that's actually refreshing. While everybody in Washington is saying, is he going to tone it down? Is he going to sound like conciliatory? Is he going to do the olive branch? He's not. He's basically putting people on notice that this is the way he's going to move it through. And a lot of Republicans are going to give him a lot of rope on that they feel that he's been so extraordinarily successful in terms of the populist movement in ways they haven't. Republicans have not been to an inaugural ball in so long that they had to go out, and get new furs. But I'm just saying that this is a very different type of time for a different type of president.
In terms of a mandate, though, I mean, obviously Democrats are going to say, of course he doesn't have a mandate. He lost the popular vote, right? Where's the mandate? The mandate is two things. One, the direction of the country. Voters and Americans have said the direction of the country is not going in the right direction. Since 2005, that number hasn't been below 60%. 60% or higher have thought that the country is not going in the right direction. Secondly, he has a mandate to change Washington. Again, we talked about this just a second ago. People want this town to change. They think nothing's getting done, and they think that he can come in and shake things up. And so where he has a mandate is on doing those two things, to try to fix the direction of the country and fix how Washington works. That's
Leslie,
where the mandate is.
as we go forward, what do you think his first number one priority will be going forward? Maybe the first success story for Donald Trump?
Definitely ACA. It's putting a lot of pressure on Congress to have an alternative.
Even though there's no plan in place, there's nothing concrete, we don't have details of what he plans to do.
I don't think we're starting from ground zero. Republicans had an alternative that was less expensive, that had many of the same things, continuing the health coverage, pre-existing condition, all of those, but didn't break the bank and really encouraged more competition. I think they're going to use that as a starting point and start looking at moving and creating momentum. I think the question some minority communities are concerned about is his, rolling back deferred action, particularly on Dreamers and some of those other executive orders that Obama pushed forward. That's really going to be a salt in the wound for people who are concerned about the wall, also with this immigrant community. So it's going to be a wait and see.
When you talk immigration, also a very big issue for him on the campaign trail, building that wall that he says Mexico will pay for. Where are we on that, and what's the buzz on Capitol Hill about that?
So where we are on that, two things. One, we don't know where we are legislatively on that. There's going to be some movement to pay for this thing. I think what everybody's realizing. See, this is what's interesting about the campaign and real life. So the campaign, you can make promises. You can make these promises and have sort of a vague way to deal with these promises, right? So he said, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. Well, it sounds great. It's great on the stump. It's always an applause line. And then you get closer to getting elected, and then you start talking to Congress, and you realize it's not that easy. You don't just build a wall on the border. There's a lot of other complications there, including how do you pay for it. So Trump now has pivoted to say, well, we're going to get Congress to pay for it because we want to do this quickly, but then we will get the money back from Mexico later. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how voters react to that ultimately.
Okay, well, we are going to send it back to you, Josh and Elaine. We are waiting for President Trump to emerge from the White House, and he'll attend the first Liberty and Freedom Ball, and then he'll head over here to our location at the Washington Convention Center. I'll send it back to you guys.
All right, Rena, thanks so much. We will have much more inauguration coverage in just a moment. But before we go to break, here's a look at some of the highlights from a historic day in Washington.
Hello. Hello, everybody.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
Whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots.
This has been the privilege of my life, and I know I speak for Michelle as well. And I can't wait to see what you do next. And I promise you I'll be right there with you. All right? God bless you.
I was very honored, very, very honored, when I heard that President Bill Clinton and Secretary Hillary Clinton was coming today. And I think it's appropriate to say, and I'd like you to stand up. I'd like you to stand up. And honestly, there's nothing more I can say because I have a lot of respect for those two people.
12 blades.